Lady Maribel Davenant had been taught to tie a ribbon before she had been taught to trust a mirror. In the upper dressing-room of Faircliff House, while London prepared itself for another glittering Mayfair ball, she stood before the glass with the ivory length drawn between her fingers and watched her own reflection become acceptable by degrees. First the left temple softened beneath silk. Then the pale line down her cheek disappeared under the angled fold. Then the woman in the mirror looked less like herself and more like the version her father allowed society to see. The room was warm from the fire and crowded with quiet signs of rank, a silver-backed brush on the dressing table, kid gloves laid beside a folded fan, a blue evening gown trimmed with seed pearls, calling cards waiting in a porcelain dish. Everything was graceful. Everything was controlled. Only Maribel's hands betrayed her, because they paused each time the ribbon touched the place where skin had healed unevenly years before. Alice, her maid, stood behind her with a pearl pin ready, careful not to stare at the scar and too kind to pretend she had not seen it. "Higher, my lady?" she asked softly. Maribel looked at the reflection of the ribbon and tried to decide whether higher meant safer or smaller. "Not yet." The words came out steady. She was proud of that. Steadiness was one of the few ornaments she had been permitted to keep. Beyond the closed door, Faircliff House moved with the nervous rhythm of an important evening. Footmen crossed the hall below. Cecily laughed somewhere near the landing, bright and light and admired before she even entered a room. Their father's voice followed, low and approving. Maribel heard the difference in him when he spoke to Cecily. With Cecily, Lord Faircliff sounded like a man presenting a jewel. With Maribel, he sounded like a man locking a cabinet. Alice lifted the pearl pin again. "His lordship asked that you be ready before Lady Cecily comes down." Maribel's gaze remained on the mirror. "Of course he did." Alice looked at her reflection, then away. "The gown suits you." "That is kind of you." "It's true, my lady." Maribel almost smiled. Truth, spoken in a servant's careful voice, felt more dangerous than flattery shouted across a ballroom. The blue silk had been chosen by her father because it was dark enough to avoid attention and expensive enough to avoid pity. He had not remembered, or perhaps had chosen not to remember, that blue had once belonged to another knight. Not this polished blue with pearls and proper sleeves. A child's memory of blue. A torn sleeve. Smoke under a nursery door. Cecily crying from somewhere low and hidden. Maribel closed her eyes, and for one suspended moment the dressing room dissolved. She saw a curtain, or thought she did. She heard a cough that might have been her sister's. She felt the weight of a small body against her chest. Then the memory broke, as it always did, beneath the weight of the story she had been given afterward. "You were confused. You were fevered. You upset the lamp. You frightened your sister. You must not speak of it again." Maribel opened her eyes. The woman in the mirror was pale, but upright. "Pin it lower," she said. Alice hesitated. "Lower." "At my throat." "Not across the cheek." The maid's eyes widened, not with disobedience but with fear of consequence. Before she could answer, the door opened without a knock. Lord Edmund Davenant, Earl of Faircliff, entered as if every room in the house existed by permission of his will. He wore evening black with a white waistcoat and the expression he reserved for errors in accounts, weather, and daughters. Behind him came Lady Cecily Davenant, fair-haired, delicate, and luminous in pale rose silk. She looked like a portrait already forgiven for every sin it might one day commit. Lord Faircliff did not greet Maribel. His eyes went first to the ribbon. "That will not do." Alice lowered her hand at once. Maribel did not turn from the mirror. "Good evening, father." "Do not begin with tone." "I began with a greeting." Cecily looked down as if embarrassed on Maribel's behalf, though the corner of her mouth trembled with something close to amusement. Lord Faircliff stepped nearer. In the mirror, his figure rose behind Maribel like a dark frame around her reflection. "The Veilcombe ball will be crowded. There will be men of consequence there tonight, men who observe families before they choose to enter them. I will not have you making a spectacle of old misfortune." Maribel's fingers rested lightly on the ivory ribbon. "Old misfortune has rarely needed my assistance to be noticed." His gaze sharpened. "Cover it properly." Alice drew in the smallest breath. Cecily moved toward the dressing table and picked up Maribel's fan, opening it with a flutter of painted silk. "Father only means that people can be unkind," she said. "Don't take everything as an injury, Maribel. It makes the evening heavy before it has started." Maribel looked at her sister in the mirror. Cecily had been 6 at the time of the fire. 6, and adored, and shielded afterward by every adult voice in the house. Maribel had been old enough, according to their father, to understand duty. Old enough to bear misunderstanding. Old enough to be silent. "People are unkind," Maribel said. "But some are trained in it at home before they practice it in public." Cecily's fan stilled. Lord Faircliff's face did not change, but the air in the dressing room tightened. "You will apologize to your sister." "For what?" "For bitterness." Maribel turned from the mirror then. It cost her something to let him see the scar before the ribbon had been adjusted. She saw the flicker of discomfort cross his face and knew, with a sharpness that almost steadied her, that he did not hate the scar because it was ugly. He hated it because it refused to obey him. "I am not bitter," she said. "I am tired." Cecily gave a small laugh. "We're all tired. The season is exhausting." "Not in the same way." Lord Faircliff moved to the dressing table and took the ribbon from Maribel's fingers. His touch did not brush her skin. He was careful about that. Care could look very similar to contempt when it was practiced long enough. He lifted the silk and held it toward Alice. "Tie it as I instructed." Alice looked at Maribel. That tiny pause was an act of courage, though no one in the room would call it that. Maribel gave the slightest nod. There were battles one could win only by surviving to choose the field. Alice stepped forward and arranged the ivory ribbon higher, across the line of the scar. Lord Faircliff watched until the mark was mostly hidden. "There," he said. "You see? There is no cruelty in making oneself presentable." Maribel met his eyes in the mirror. "No. The cruelty is in deciding what part of someone must disappear before they are allowed to enter a room." Cecily snapped the fan shut. "Maribel, don't ruin this evening. Please. It's important. For you? For the family." Lord Faircliff took the fan from Cecily and returned it to the dressing table with controlled gentleness. "Your sister has a future that depends on impressions. You have always known that your role is to avoid damaging them." There it was. Not spoken in anger. Worse. Spoken as household law. Maribel thought of the blue dress in the half-memory, the smoke, the curtain, the little cry. She thought of all the times she had been told her recollections were fever dreams, guilt dreams, childish nonsense preserved by pain. If the past was truly settled, why did her father still guard it like a locked drawer? "And my future?" she asked. Lord Faircliff looked almost surprised by the question. "Your comfort is provided for." "That is not the same thing. It is more than many women receive." "That is also not the same thing." A faint flush rose along his cheekbones. Cecily's eyes darted toward the door, toward escape, toward the staircase where admiration waited. Maribel recognized the movement. Cecily had always fled before truth could ask anything of her. Lord Faircliff lowered his voice. "You will attend tonight. You will stand where you are placed. You will speak when spoken to. You will not invite inquiry. Most of all, you will not make the room uncomfortable." Maribel looked back at the mirror. The ribbon was smooth now. The gown was correct. The scar was hidden enough for society and visible enough for her to feel the lie. "Very well," she said. Her father studied her, suspicious of compliance that came too easily. "Very well what?" "I will attend." She lifted her gloves from the table and drew one over her hand finger by finger. "But if a room becomes uncomfortable because I exist in it, perhaps the fault is not entirely mine." For several seconds no one spoke. Then Lord Faircliff turned toward the door. "Come, Cecily." Cecily followed him, but at the threshold she glanced back. There was something uncertain in her face now, something almost frightened. It vanished as soon as she remembered how to be beautiful. When they were gone, Alice released the breath she had been holding. "My lady, are you certain you wish to go?" Maribel took the second glove and smoothed it over her wrist. Downstairs, the carriage wheel sounded on the stones outside. London was waiting with its chandeliers, its whispers, its rules, and its hunger for any woman who stood slightly outside them. Maribel looked once more at the mirror. She did not trust it. Not yet. But she no longer believed her father owned everything it showed. Yes, she said. If I stay hidden, he will call it peace. Alice opened the door. Maribel stepped into the corridor, where candlelight ran along the banister and Cecily's rose silk glimmered below like a promise made to everyone else. Lord Faircliff waited at the foot of the stairs. His eyes lifted to the ribbon first, then to her face, then away. Maribel descended slowly, one gloved hand on the rail, each step measured, each breath her own. Behind the ivory silk, the scar remained. Beneath the scar, the memory waited. And for the first time in years, Maribel wondered whether memory had been waiting not to shame her, but to save her. The carriage drew away from Faircliff House with Cecily seated opposite Maribel, her rose silk arranged like a soft accusation. Lord Faircliff took the forward-facing seat beside his younger daughter, leaving Maribel near the darker corner where the lamplight from the street came and went across the ivory ribbon at her cheek. No one spoke for the first half-mile. London did that work for them. Wheels struck damp stones. Hooves rang under the high fronts of Mayfair houses. Through the window, Maribel saw lit drawing-rooms, passing footmen, and ladies descending beneath awnings with jewels at their throats, each one entering the evening as if the world had been prepared for her arrival. Cecily adjusted one glove and glanced toward Maribel with a softness that fooled strangers more often than sisters. "You must not look so solemn when we arrive," she said. "Lady Veilcombe notices everything. Then she will notice I am not laughing." "Maribel." Lord Faircliff's voice was quiet enough to be worse than a reprimand. "This is not an evening for cleverness." "No," Maribel said. "It is an evening for display." Cecily looked out the window. Her reflection appeared over the dark glass, young and fair and uncertain beneath the pearls in her hair. "I didn't ask to be displayed either." The confession was so unexpected that Maribel almost answered gently. Then Lord Faircliff's hand closed over the silver head of his cane. "You were born to be admired, Cecily. That is not a burden one complains of." Cecily lowered her lashes at once. Maribel watched the obedience cross her sister's face and felt an old, unwelcome pity. Their father had made one daughter into a shadow and the other into a candle. Neither had been asked whether she wished to burn. Lady Veilcombe's house stood in a row of pale stone mansions where every window was bright and every step crowded with the evidence of rank. A line of carriages curved along the street. Footmen in livery opened doors. Voices rose and fell beneath the awning, polished by breeding and sharpened by appetite. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers, gilt mirrors, and flowers massed so thickly along the walls that the air smelled of orange blossom and wax. Maribel entered behind Cecily and felt the first assessment move over them. It always began with Cecily. Fair hair. Fine complexion. Excellent posture. Marriageable. Then the gaze shifted, reluctantly or eagerly, to Maribel. Blue gown. Covered cheek. Older sister. Unfortunate. Still here. She heard none of the words aloud, not yet, but she had spent years learning the grammar of glances. Lady Prudence Veilcombe came forward in lavender satin, her smile as exact as a cut jewel. Lord Faircliff. Lady Cecily. Lady Maribel. Her eyes rested a second too long on the ribbon. "How very pleased I am that you were able to attend." Lord Faircliff bowed. "You are gracious to receive us." "Nonsense. London must see its old families gathered, especially when certain distinguished guests have at last stopped refusing every invitation." Cecily brightened. "Distinguished guests." Lady Veilcombe's fan opened with a snap soft enough to pass as elegance. "The Duke of Alderwick is expected." The name moved through the nearby cluster of ladies like a current beneath silk. Even Maribel felt it. His Grace Benedict Vale, Duke of Alderwick, was spoken of in London as if he were less a man than a verdict. Rich, cold, exacting, rarely amused, and of a rank that made ambitious mothers forget moderation. He had returned from his Hampshire estate only 10 days earlier, and already half the season had rearranged itself around the possibility of pleasing him. Cecily's face changed. Not much. Just enough. Lord Faircliff saw it and approved. Then the evening may prove useful, he murmured. Maribel looked toward the ballroom floor, where couples were forming for a quadrille. Useful. A word that turned every person into furniture. Lady Veilcombe guided Cecily toward a knot of young women near the musicians, where the light fell kindly and every passing gentleman had to look at her. Maribel was left near a marble column with a glass of lemonade she had not asked for and a view of the room no one intended her to enter. It was a familiar position. Near enough to be counted. Far enough to be forgotten. For several minutes she allowed herself to study the evening as if it were a painting. A countess pretending not to notice that her daughter's hem was uneven. A baron whispering behind his program. A girl with red gold hair laughing too loudly because the man beside her had not laughed first. Then the room altered. It did not fall silent. It became arranged. Spine straightened. Fan slowed. Mothers turned with the grace of ships changing course. At the entrance stood a tall man in black evening dress, his dark hair cut close, his face composed with an austerity that made every smile around him seem newly foolish. Benedict Vale did not need to announce power. The room did it for him. Lady Veilcombe reached him first, already inclining her head. Two matrons followed, then a marquis, then a young lady in white who appeared to have been positioned for the purpose of being noticed. The Duke bowed with impeccable restraint. He accepted greetings. He gave nothing away. Maribel watched him because everyone watched him, and because unlike the others, he seemed bored not by people, but by performance. His gaze moved across the room with cool courtesy, pausing nowhere long enough to flatter. It passed over Cecily, who had been turned slightly by their father into the most advantageous angle of candlelight. It passed over Lady Veilcombe's hopeful smile. Then, for the space of one breath, it reached the marble column. Maribel looked away first. Not in shyness. In habit. Lord Faircliff appeared at her side so suddenly that she nearly spilled the lemonade. His voice stayed low. Why are you standing with your face toward the room? Maribel did not move. Because the room is in front of me. Do not be impertinent. He reached toward the ribbon, then stopped before touching it, perhaps remembering where they were. It has slipped. It has not. It has exposed enough. Her throat tightened. She saw, beyond his shoulder, a flash of black evening cloth. The Duke stood not far away, speaking to Lady Veilcombe, or appearing to. Cover it properly, Lord Faircliff murmured. Do not embarrass your sister. The words were quiet. They were meant to die between father and daughter. They did not. Benedict Vale's eyes lifted. He had heard. Maribel knew it before she could pretend otherwise, because his expression did not change in any obvious way. Men who had heard nothing looked curious. Men who had heard too much became still. The Duke became still. Lord Faircliff followed the direction of her gaze and saw him. For the first time that evening, uncertainty crossed her father's face. It was gone quickly, replaced by the polished mask of rank meeting greater rank. Your Grace, he said, bowing with measured respect. Faircliff, the Duke answered. His voice was calm, deep, and without warmth. Lady Veilcombe drifted nearer with Cecily in tow, eager to repair any social arrangement that had not placed beauty first. Your Grace, may I present Lady Cecily Davenant? I believe you will find her one of the most charming young ladies of the season. Cecily curtsied with perfect grace. Your Grace. Benedict bowed. Lady Cecily. His courtesy was faultless. It was also brief. Lady Veilcombe's eyes flickered. Lord Faircliff stepped in. My younger daughter has been looking forward to the music this evening. She has a fine ear. Maribel almost smiled at the absurdity. Cecily liked applause after music. That was not the same as music. The Duke's gaze moved, not to Cecily, but to Maribel's hands where they held the untouched lemonade. And your elder daughter? Lord Faircliff's jaw tightened by a fraction. Lady Maribel prefers quieter corners. Does she? Benedict asked. The question was mild. It was also not addressed to Lord Faircliff. Maribel felt the weight of the room shift, or perhaps only the weight of her father's expectation. She should have lowered her eyes. She should have let him answer for her. Instead, she looked at the Duke. I have been placed in them often enough to understand their advantages. For one terrible second, no one spoke. Then something almost like interest touched Benedict Vale's face. A useful education, though not always a voluntary one. Lord Faircliff said quickly, my daughter has a tendency toward dry remarks. It is a family indulgence. It did not sound like an indulgence, Benedict said. It sounded like accuracy. Cecily's lips parted. Lady Valecombe gave a small, bright laugh that fooled no one. How severe we have become. Come, Lady Cecily, I promise to introduce you to Lady Markham before the next set. Lord Faircliff hesitated, trapped between ambition and alarm. He could not draw Cecily away from Lady Valecombe's promotion, and he could not order a duke to stop speaking. Benedict solved the matter by turning slightly, placing his body in such a way that the line of sight between Maribel and the most curious cluster of women was quietly broken. It was not dramatic. It was not possessive. It was merely precise. Maribel noticed because she had lived too long among people who used their bodies to block doors. This man used his to block cruelty. You need not answer any question you dislike, he said, his voice lowered enough that only she heard. The remark should have comforted her. Instead, it unsettled her. Most questions I dislike are answered for me. Then perhaps the evening requires better questions. He glanced toward the musicians, who were arranging sheets for the next waltz. A stir of anticipation moved through the room. Mothers adjusted daughters. Gentlemen calculated obligations. Lord Faircliff returned his attention to Cecily, now placed where the Duke could not easily overlook her without making the refusal visible. Maribel understood the choreography. She had been moved aside. Cecily had been presented. The Duke was expected to complete the picture. Benedict Vale looked once at Cecily. Then he looked back at Maribel. The ballroom seemed to draw a breath before anyone knew why. He took one step toward her, not toward the rose silk waiting under the chandelier, not toward the future Lord Faircliff had arranged, but toward the woman by the marble column with the ivory ribbon at her cheek and silence trained into her spine. Maribel's hand tightened around the glass. Her father turned too late. The Duke had already begun to cross the floor. The Duke of Alderwick crossed the ballroom with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never once needed to chase attention. Attention followed him. It moved in whispers, in lifted brows, in the slight re-angling of shoulders as every guest tried to understand what had just gone wrong with the evening's expected arrangement. Lady Valecombe's smile faltered first. Cecily's fan paused halfway open. Lord Faircliff took one step as if to intercept him, then remembered that an earl did not intercept a duke without inviting the entire room to notice his fear. Maribel remained beside the marble column with the lemonade glass cold against her glove and the ivory ribbon warm where it crossed her cheek. For one unreasonable moment, she wondered whether the Duke meant to pass her and speak to someone behind her. Women like Cecily were approached. Women like Maribel were avoided kindly or studied cruelly. They were not selected in the center of a ballroom. Benedict stopped before her and bowed. Not a careless inclination given to a wallflower out of charity. A full, correct bow offered to a lady whose answer mattered. Lady Maribel, he said, and her name sounded different in his voice, not softened, not pitied, only recognized. May I have the next dance? The room did not fall silent all at once. It failed by degrees. A laugh near the supper room died in the middle. The scratch of a fan stopped. Someone behind Lady Valecombe whispered, too softly to be called rude and too audibly to be called accidental. Maribel heard Cecily inhale. She heard Lord Faircliff's cane touch the floor once, a small hard sound of warning. The musicians began the opening bars of a waltz, bright and graceful and absurdly alive. Maribel looked at the Duke's outstretched hand, then at his face. Your Grace, she said, keeping her voice low, I believe there may have been a mistake. There has, he replied. But not mine. A dangerous warmth moved through the air between them. She should have refused. That would be safer. It would preserve Cecily's chances, her father's temper, Lady Valecombe's arrangement, and the evening's smooth surface. It would also return Maribel to the marble column, where she could stand with her face corrected and her existence minimized until the carriage came. Benedict waited. He did not press. He did not smile as if the matter were charming. He gave her the dignity of a decision. "If you would rather not," he said, "say so, and I will trouble you no further." No man in that room had ever asked whether she would rather not. Her throat tightened. "And if I say yes? Then we dance. With everyone looking." "They already are." It was so plain, so unsentimental, that she nearly laughed. She placed the lemonade glass on a passing footman's tray with a steadiness she did not feel. Then she set her gloved hand in his. The contact was proper, light, and restrained, but the room reacted as if something far more scandalous had occurred. Lord Faircliff stepped forward. "Your Grace, my daughter is not accustomed to waltzing." Benedict did not release her hand. "Then I shall be careful. She tires easily. Then I shall stop if she asks." "Lady Cecily has already promised herself to the next set only loosely," Lady Veilcombe inserted with a brittle brightness. "If your Grace prefers a partner better known to the room, I'm sure no one would object." Benedict's gaze did not move from Maribel. "I did not ask no one." Maribel felt the sentence pass through her like a door opening. It was not dramatic enough to be a declaration, yet it cut through every arrangement made around her without her consent. The Duke led her toward the floor. The path seemed longer than any corridor she had ever walked. Faces turned. Men who had ignored her for years examined her with new calculation, as though a duke's interest had altered the value of what they were seeing. Women looked from the ribbon to Benedict's profile, then to Cecily's shocked pallor. Maribel kept her eyes forward. She would not give them the satisfaction of appearing dragged. At the edge of the floor, Benedict paused. "You may still decline." "I know. Do you wish to?" Her father's stare pressed against her back. Cecily's hurt pride flickered at the edge of the room. Lady Veilcombe's displeasure waited like a sharpened pin. Maribel thought of the dressing-room mirror, of the ribbon tightened under command, of the blue flash of memory she had been told to distrust. "No," she said. "I wish to finish what I have begun." Benedict inclined his head. "Then allow me to follow your courage and pretend it is my lead." The waltz took them. Maribel had danced before, though rarely with partners who remembered she was a person rather than an obligation. Benedict's hand held the air at her back with exact propriety. His steps were measured, neither displaying her nor concealing her. After the first turn, the room shifted around them in a whirl of candlelight, silk, and astonishment. Maribel's pulse hammered, but her feet remembered. Her mother had taught her once, before illness had thinned her voice and death had made the house colder. Turn with the music, not with fear. Maribel turned. The ivory ribbon brushed her cheek. She resisted the urge to adjust it. Benedict noticed. Of course he noticed. He seemed to notice everything one tried hardest to hide. "Is the ribbon uncomfortable?" he asked. "Less so than the reasons for it." His eyes sharpened, but his voice remained even. "That is an honest answer. It may not be a prudent one. Prudence is often praised by those who benefit from silence." She looked up at him. The words had found the hidden place where her anger lived, small and disciplined and almost ashamed of itself. "You speak as if you dislike silence." "No. I dislike enforced silence. Voluntary silence can be quite intelligent. And mine. Yours sounds trained." The simplicity of it struck her harder than sympathy would have done. She missed a half step. Benedict adjusted instantly, saving the movement without making the correction visible. "Forgive me," she said. Nothing was lost. People saw. People see badly. That almost made her smile. The music carried them past Lord Faircliff, whose face had settled into a pale mask. Maribel felt her body react before her mind did. Her shoulder tightened. Her breath shortened. The next turn brought her closer to her father's line of sight, and the old instruction rose inside her. "Lower your eyes. Hide the mark. Make no one uncomfortable." Benedict's hand did not tighten, but his attention changed. "Do you wish to stop?" he asked. No, the answer came too quickly, but it was true. "Then we will not." He is angry. I observed. That does not concern you. It concerns me that you are afraid of it. Maribel's gaze moved to his face. I did not say I was afraid. No, he said quietly. You stood straighter. For a moment, the ballroom blurred. It was an intolerable thing to be seen so accurately by a stranger. Not admired. Not assessed. Seen. You should not say such things in a room like this, she murmured. Why not? Because rooms like this punish women for being understood. Then rooms like this have been overindulged. This time she did smile, not brightly, not fully, but enough that Benedict's expression shifted as if the small change mattered. The waltz neared its end. Maribel knew because the tension in the watchers sharpened. Everyone wanted to know how the miracle would conclude, whether the Duke would bow and abandon her, whether he would turn towards Cecily at last, whether the scarred lady would be returned to her corner with a story society could safely reduce to curiosity. The final notes rang out. Benedict released her at the proper moment and bowed. Maribel curtsied, her pulse still running too fast beneath the blue silk. Applause rose for the musicians, but half the room forgot to clap. Benedict offered his arm to escort her from the floor. Where would you prefer to stand? He asked. The question seemed small until she understood it. Not where had her father placed her. Not where would she draw the least comment. Where would she prefer? Maribel looked toward the marble column. Then toward the windows overlooking the dark garden, where there was air and enough light to be visible. Near the windows, she said. Not hidden. Benedict nodded once. Near the windows, then. They crossed the room together. Lord Faircliff watched them with a face like sealed correspondence. Cecily looked wounded, but beneath the wound there was something stranger, something almost frightened. Lady Veilcombe whispered rapidly behind her fan, already trying to stitch the evening back into a pattern she understood. Maribel knew the punishment would come later. In the carriage. In the drawing room. In the breakfast silence. But for now, she stood beside the windows with the Duke of Alderwick at a respectful distance, the whole ballroom forced to accept that she had not vanished after being seen. Benedict turned slightly toward her. Lady Maribel, may I call at Faircliff House tomorrow? Her breath caught. A dance could be dismissed as impulse. A call could not. Across the room, Lord Faircliff heard enough to stiffen. Maribel felt the old fear rise, but it no longer stood alone. Something else rose with it, quieter and more stubborn. Yes, Your Grace, she said. If my father permits it. Benedict looked toward Lord Faircliff, then back to her. Then I shall give him every opportunity to remember his manners. The next set began, but Maribel did not hear the first notes. She was watching her father's face, and for the first time in years, she saw not certainty there, but alarm. The ribbon still covered her scar. The past still waited behind locked doors. Yet the lock had made a sound. A small one. A first one. And every person in the room had heard it. By the time the Faircliff carriage returned home, the waltz had become more than an event. It had become a problem. Lord Faircliff did not speak for nearly the entire journey, which meant Cecily did. She spoke of the music, of Lady Veilcombe's unfortunate headache, of Lady Markham's diamonds, of anything that might smooth the air between them and fail. Maribel sat with her hands folded over the ivory ribbon at her cheek and watched the lamps of London slide across the window glass. She had expected anger. She had not expected the more unsettling sensation that came before it, the memory of the Duke's voice asking where she preferred to stand. No one had ever asked her that in her father's house. At the door of Faircliff House, Lord Faircliff handed Cecily down first, then entered ahead of both daughters without offering a word. Only when they were inside the hall, beneath the dim portraits of dead Davenants and their inherited certainties, did he turn. You will not encourage him. Cecily stopped on the lower stair. Maribel removed her glove slowly. His Grace requires very little encouragement from me. You know what I mean. I am beginning to understand that many things I was expected to know were never explained. Cecily made a nervous sound. Maribel, don't. It was only one dance. Lord Faircliff looked at his younger daughter. Go upstairs. But father, now. Cecily obeyed, though she glanced back once from the landing, her face caught between resentment and fear. Maribel waited until her sister disappeared. Then she looked at her father. "Will you refuse his call tomorrow? I will decide what is proper. For me, or for Cecily?" His face hardened. "Do not flatter yourself that this is courtship. A duke may indulge a curiosity at a ball. That does not mean he intends to attach himself to a woman whose presence invites questions." The words were not new. The pain was not new. What was new was the quiet space inside Maribel where they failed to take root. "If questions are so dangerous," she said, "perhaps the answers are worse than the asking." For the first time, Lord Faircliff looked less angry than alarmed. Then the mask returned. "Go to bed." Maribel curtsied because obedience could still be used as armor. "Good night, father." She climbed the stairs with the ribbon still in place, but the knot felt different now. Not looser. More temporary. Morning came behind grey curtains and a breakfast table laid with too much silver. Lord Faircliff read 2 letters before the first cup of tea had cooled. Cecily had dark shadows beneath her eyes, though she had dressed herself in pale yellow, a colour chosen to look innocent under scrutiny. Maribel wore a simple morning gown and tied the ivory ribbon at her throat rather than across her cheek. Alice had said nothing when asked to arrange it so, but her hands had trembled with approval. Lord Faircliff noticed before he reached for the marmalade. "That is improper." "It is morning," Maribel said. "There are no chandeliers to offend." Cecily looked at the scar, then away. Lord Faircliff's reply was interrupted by the butler entering with a silver tray. "A card, my lord." The room stilled. Lord Faircliff took it. His mouth tightened as he read the engraved name. His Grace the Duke of Alderwick. Cecily set down her teacup too quickly. It touched the saucer with a sharp note. Maribel did not move. "Already?" Cecily whispered. Lord Faircliff looked toward the hall as if the caller himself had committed an offence by existing in daylight. "Where is he?" "In the front drawing-room, my lord. Mrs. Elspeth Rowley is with him." That name altered the matter. Mrs. Rowley was a widowed cousin of Maribel's late mother, sharp-tongued, respectable, and inconveniently difficult to dismiss. Lord Faircliff had avoided her for years because she had a memory for old wounds and no talent for pretending not to see fresh ones. "Mrs. Rowley," he said. "She arrived first, my lord, saying she had promised Lady Maribel a call." Maribel lowered her gaze to hide the sudden flicker of gratitude. Mrs. Rowley had been at the ball. She must have understood the risk of a duke's morning call and made herself the answer before anyone could ask the wrong question. Lord Faircliff rose. "You will both come." "Both?" Cecily asked, hope returning too quickly. It would be discourteous not to present the family. Maribel stood. She felt the scar uncovered in the grey morning light. She also felt, with an odd steadiness, that uncovering was not the same as surrender. The front drawing-room had been arranged to impress without appearing to try. Pale walls, blue chairs, a marble mantel, fresh flowers near the window. Benedict Vale stood when they entered. Mrs. Rowley sat near the tea table like a small queen who had captured enemy territory and found the furniture disappointing. She wore dark grey silk, a lace cap, and an expression that suggested she had been waiting years for someone in Faircliff House to be forced into honesty. "Faircliff," she said. "You look older." Lord Faircliff bowed with visible effort. "Mrs. Rowley." "How unexpected." "Most useful things are." Benedict bowed to the Earl, then to Cecily, then to Maribel. His gaze did not fasten on the scar. It registered her choice of ribbon at her throat and moved to her eyes. That small mercy nearly unsteadied her. "Lady Maribel." "Your Grace." Cecily curtsied with polished grace. "Your Grace, London has not stopped speaking of last night." "London often continues speaking after it has ceased thinking," Benedict said. Cecily blinked, unsure whether she had been corrected. Mrs. Rowley's mouth twitched. Lord Faircliff gestured toward the chairs. "You honor us with your call." "I said I would call," Benedict replied. "I prefer not to make liars of my own words." The sentence was mild, but Maribel saw her father hear its edge. Tea was poured. Etiquette arranged everyone into position civilization could tolerate. Lord Faircliff spoke first of the weather, then of Parliament, then of a charity subscription, each subject placed before the Duke like furniture blocking a door. Benedict answered courteously and moved past each obstacle with no visible impatience. At last Mrs. Rowley set down her cup. "This is dull." His Grace did not come to discuss clouds. Lord Faircliff's smile thinned. "Perhaps His Grace will tell us his purpose." Benedict turned slightly toward Maribel. "I came to thank Lady Maribel for the dance and to ask whether she recovered from an evening that appeared determined to exhaust her." The room changed. Not dramatically. It tightened. Maribel felt her father's warning before he spoke. She answered before he could. "I recovered well enough. Only well enough. One must leave room for improvement." Benedict's eyes warmed. A disciplined answer. A necessary one. Mrs. Rowley watched them with interest sharpened by age. Cecily leaned forward. "Maribel is often tired after society. She prefers quiet, as father says." Benedict looked to Cecily with perfect courtesy. "Does she?" Cecily faltered. "I only meant, people often do." Maribel should not have felt defended by so little. Yet she did, because he did not embarrass Cecily. He merely returned the question to its rightful owner. "Do you prefer quiet, Lady Maribel?" he asked. She touched the handle of her teacup. "I prefer music to noise." "There is a difference." "A large one." "Do you play?" The question struck closer than it should have. Maribel felt, rather than saw, Lord Faircliff's gaze sharpen. The piano in the west parlour had been closed for years. Not locked, exactly. Merely neglected with such insistence that touching it would have felt like trespass. "I used to," she said. "Before?" Benedict asked softly. Lord Faircliff's cup met its saucer. "Before my daughter outgrew childish occupations." Maribel looked at him. "I was 16. Mrs. Rowley's eyes narrowed. "Hardly ancient." Benedict remained still. "Who taught you?" Maribel heard smoke beneath a door. A blue sleeve. A woman's voice telling her to count time instead of fear. "My mother began." Later, Miss Anselm continued. The name changed the room more completely than the Duke's arrival had. Lord Faircliff's hand closed over the arm of his chair. Cecily looked confused first, then anxious, as if she recognized the name from a nursery dream and wished she did not. Benedict noticed all of it. "Miss Anselm," he repeated. "Your governess?" "Yes." Lord Faircliff said, "A servant from many years ago." "Of no consequence." "Few people are of no consequence to those they help shape," Benedict said. Maribel felt the word settle beside her like a shield she had not requested and did not resent. Her father rose. "Lady Maribel has had enough conversation for one morning." Mrs. Rowley lifted her brows. "She appears to be bearing language with heroic fortitude." Benedict stood as well, because rank and manners demanded no less and no more. "Then I shall not overstay." He took a card from inside his coat and placed it on the tray near Maribel, not in her hand, not with secrecy, not in a way that could be called improper. "I hope you will permit me to send an invitation for the opera, with Mrs. Rowley as chaperone if she is willing." Mrs. Rowley did not hesitate. "I am willing when it annoys the correct people." Cecily gave a faint laugh, then stopped when no one joined her. Lord Faircliff's face had gone cold. "We shall consider what is suitable." Benedict bowed. "Of course. Suitability is best examined in daylight." His gaze turned once more to Maribel. "Lady Maribel." After he left, the room seemed smaller. Mrs. Rowley remained only long enough to kiss Maribel's cheek, the uncovered side, with deliberate affection. "I shall expect your note," she said. "And if no note arrives, I shall assume it was misplaced by someone tiresome and come myself." When she was gone, Lord Faircliff stood by the mantel without looking at either daughter. "You will not mention Miss Anselm again." Maribel looked down at the Duke's card on the tray. Black ink, steady hand, undeniable name. "Why?" "Because the past has been settled." Cecily whispered, "Has it?" The question was so small that Maribel almost thought she had imagined it. Lord Faircliff turned. "What did you say?" Cecily went pale. "Nothing." Maribel lifted the card from the tray. Her father's eyes followed the motion. "Maribel." She met his gaze. "If the past is settled, father, it should not tremble when spoken aloud." He said nothing. That frightened her more than rage would have done. Later, alone in her chamber, Maribel opened the rosewood box she kept beneath her folded shawls. Inside lay her mother's old ivory ribbon spool, a cracked music primer, and beneath both, a scrap of paper she had not dared read in years. She unfolded it with careful fingers. The ink had faded, but one line remained clear enough to wound. The lamp was not where his lordship claimed. Maribel sat very still. Below stairs, her father's voice moved through the house like a lock turning. In her hand, the past did not feel settled. It felt alive. Maribel did not sleep after reading the line. She sat beside the narrow window of her chamber until the candle guttered, the scrap of paper spread across her lap and the ivory ribbon lying beside it like a witness that had been too long instructed to keep quiet. The words were not dramatic. They did not accuse. That made them worse. The lamp was not where his lordship claimed. A more foolish woman might have dismissed the sentence as the bitterness of a governess sent away without praise. A more obedient daughter might have returned it to the rosewood box and convinced herself that fathers did not build family stories out of lies. Maribel had spent years trying to be both foolish and obedient enough to survive. The effort had exhausted her. By morning, the house had resumed its careful rhythm. Breakfast was quiet, because Lord Faircliff had chosen quiet as punishment. He read his correspondence behind the newspaper and said nothing about the Duke of Alderwick's proposed invitation, which meant he was thinking of little else. Cecily wore lavender and avoided Maribel's eyes. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the name Miss Anselm, with the Duke's card, and with the line of ink now hidden in Maribel's sleeve. After breakfast, Maribel returned to her chamber and opened the rosewood box again. She removed each object slowly. Her mother's ivory ribbon spool. The cracked music primer. A dried sprig of lavender from a summer at Faircliff Park. Beneath the lining, where the wood had loosened near one corner, she found a second fragment she had forgotten or perhaps had not known she possessed. The paper had been folded so tightly that its crease had nearly cut through the words. Maribel smoothed it flat with careful fingers. Miss Anselm's hand was unmistakable, angular and disciplined, the hand of a woman who had believed clarity could protect the truth. I saw Lady Maribel carry Lady Cecily from the nursery before the screen fell. The blue dress was scorched at the sleeve. She had not gone near the lamp before then. Maribel stopped breathing. The room remained perfectly ordinary around her. A washstand. A wardrobe. A silver brush. The pale morning light on the rug. Yet the world beneath those ordinary things shifted. Blue dress. Scorched sleeve. A child's weight in her arms. Smoke in the throat. Cecily crying into her shoulder. The images did not come as a clean memory. They came as pieces returning to a table from which they had been swept in anger. She pressed the fragment to her mouth and closed her eyes. She had not imagined all of it. She had not invented herself innocent because guilt was too heavy. Someone else had seen. Someone else had known. A knock came at the door. Maribel folded the paper so quickly that one edge bent. Yes? Cecily entered without waiting for permission, as she had done since girlhood, though her confidence seemed less certain than usual. Father says you are not to send a reply to His Grace until he has reviewed the wording. Maribel slipped the fragment into the music primer. How generous of him to review words he does not own. Cecily frowned. You are determined to make everything unpleasant. No. I am determined to notice when it already is. Cecily shut the door behind her. The soft click sounded like a decision she had not meant to make. You embarrassed father yesterday. At breakfast, or by existing at the ball. Don't twist my meaning. Then say what you mean clearly. Cecily looked toward the mirror, then at the ribbon on the dressing table. I mean you should be careful. His Grace is powerful, but powerful men grow tired of difficult women. If father is harsh, it's because he knows how London speaks. Maribel turned slowly. Does he know how London speaks, or does he teach it what to say? Cecily's face tightened. That isn't fair. No. It is not. For a moment, the answer landed between them exactly as it was. Cecily looked younger then, as if the carefully arranged curls and lavender muslin were costume rather than skin. You think I wanted any of this? She asked. I think you wanted the parts that benefited you. The words hurt both of them. Maribel saw it. She did not take them back. Cecily crossed to the dressing table and picked up the ivory ribbon spool. Her fingers moved over it with restless delicacy. You act as though I chose to be pretty, or chosen, or watched. Father looks at me as if one wrong step will shatter the only hope he has left. Do you think that feels like love? Maribel had no immediate answer. She had expected vanity. She had not expected truth, even a small and frightened piece of it. Cecily went on, quieter. When people look at you, they whisper. When they look at me, they calculate. It isn't kindness just because it flatters. The confession stirred pity, but pity could not be allowed to erase harm. Then you should understand what it is to be used, Maribel said. You should not help him do it to me. Cecily's hand tightened around the ribbon. I don't help him. Maribel looked at the spool, then at her sister. You corrected my ribbon at the ball before Lady Markham's son came near. You laughed when Lady Vailcombe called me solemn. You told me this morning that I should be careful, when what you meant was that I should be quiet. Cecily's eyes filled too quickly for Maribel to trust the tears. What do you want from me? One honest thing. About what? Maribel took the music primer from the box and held it against her waist. Her heart beat hard, but her voice stayed level. The nursery fire. Cecily went white. Not pale. White. The change was so complete that Maribel felt the old memory stir like a curtain in heat. I was 6, Cecily whispered. I don't remember. You remember something? No, the answer came too fast. Cecily set the ribbon down as if it had burned her. I remember smoke sometimes. I remember being told you were confused. I remember father saying I must not ask questions because you were ill and questions upset you. She gave a thin laugh that contained no amusement. I remember people being very kind to me whenever I stopped speaking. Maribel's anger faltered, not because it had been wrong, but because it had not been the whole truth. Cecily. Her sister stepped back. Don't. Please. I can't help you. Or you will not. Cecily looked at the door. There may be no difference in this house. She left before Maribel could answer. The room seemed colder after she was gone. Maribel stood with Miss Anselm's fragment hidden inside the music primer and understood that her sister had not given her the truth, but she had given her something nearly as revealing. Fear. Downstairs, a clock struck 11. In Alderwick House, nearly 2 miles across Mayfair, Benedict Vale stood in his study with Maribel's name still unspoken on his tongue. The previous morning call had left him with 2 facts that did not sit quietly. Lord Faircliff feared Miss Anselm's name, and Lady Maribel had looked at the past as if it were a locked room she had been taught to blame herself for entering. Mr. Harbury, his confidential solicitor, waited near the desk with a notebook in hand and the air of a man prepared to hear either estate business or scandal and treat both with equal discretion. I require information, Benedict said. A former governess in the Faircliff household. Miss Helena Anselm. Employed at Faircliff Park roughly 10 or 11 years ago. Dismissed, I suspect, without enthusiasm from the family. Mr. Harbury made a note. Do you want her found quietly? Very quietly. Is there danger? Benedict thought of the ribbon at Maribel's throat, the way Faircliff had said of no consequence, and the brief terror that had crossed Cecily Davenant's face. Not the sort men admit to causing. Mr. Harbury looked up. Benedict rarely spoke in riddles unless anger had narrowed his restraint. Shall I begin with household registries and pension records? Begin with Bath. Former governesses often retire where respectability costs less and gossip travels slower. If she left without a character, someone may remember the injustice of it. And if she does not wish to be found? Benedict turned toward the window. Outside, Mayfair shone with a clean hypocrisy of late morning. Then you will not frighten her. You will tell her only that a lady she once served may need the truth. Mr. Harbury closed the notebook. That is a powerful word, Your Grace. It should be. Benedict looked back at the card tray on his desk, where the invitation to the opera waited to be written in a hand formal enough to satisfy etiquette and unmistakable enough to challenge interference. It has been powerless in that house for too long. That afternoon, Maribel received the invitation under her father's silence and Cecily's watchful confusion. Royal Italian Opera at Covent Garden. Mrs. Rowley to attend. Every propriety observed. Every refusal made more revealing by its difficulty. Maribel held the card and felt the fragments of Miss Anselm's letter inside the music primer upstairs, hidden but no longer dead. Her father said, "We shall consider whether it is wise." Maribel looked at the engraved name of the Duke of Alderwick and thought of blue silk, smoke, and a lamp where it should not have been. "Yes," she said softly. "I believe wisdom is overdue." Lord Fairclough considered wisdom for 2 days and disliked every shape it took. Refusal would make him look afraid of a duke. Acceptance would place Maribel where Benedict Vale could continue asking questions no father wished answered. In the end, rank won over caution. The carriage carried Maribel and Mrs. Rowley to the Royal Italian Opera at Covent Garden on a damp evening jewelled by lamps, with Fairclough's permission delivered in the form of a silence so cold it might have been packed in ice. Mrs. Rowley sat beside Maribel, wrapped in dark green silk and impatience. "Your father believes propriety is a leash," she said as the carriage turned toward the theatre. "He forgets that a leash may be noticed by the wrong dog." Maribel looked down at her gloves. The ivory ribbon had been threaded through a small pearl clasp at her throat, not drawn across her cheek. Alice had arranged it with careful hands and said only, "There, my lady. It looks like yours." That had mattered more than any compliment. The scar was partly visible where candlelight or carriage lamps found it. Maribel felt exposed, but not undressed. There was a difference. "I am not sure I am brave enough for this," she said. Mrs. Rowley gave her a sharp look. "Courage is not a temperament. It is a decision made while one's stomach behaves disgracefully." The answer was so practical that Maribel almost smiled. Outside the opera house, the entrance blazed with arrival. Carriages crowded the street. Footmen opened doors beneath the awning. Ladies gathered their skirts above the wet stone, and gentlemen offered arms with the grave importance of men performing kindness under public supervision. Opera glasses had not yet been lifted, but Maribel felt herself inspected all the same. She heard one woman whisper, "That is Fairclough's elder daughter." Another replied, "The one from the ball." No one said scar. That was how well-bred cruelty worked. It left the ugliest word unspoken and let everyone hear it anyway. Mrs. Rowley tightened her hand over Maribel's arm. "Steady. You are not entering a courtroom. Though half these people could use sentencing." Benedict waited near the entrance to his box, dressed in black with a white waistcoat and an expression so composed it made the surrounding chatter seem poorly rehearsed. He bowed first to Mrs. Rowley, then to Maribel. "Lady Maribel. I'm glad you came." The simple human shape of the contraction softened the formality more than any flourish could have done. "Your Grace," she said. "You made refusal socially inconvenient. I hope to make acceptance possible." Mrs. Rowley looked between them. "Good. Both of you can speak in sentences. That will save the evening from becoming decorative." Benedict's mouth moved almost imperceptibly. He offered his arm to Mrs. Rowley first, then led them into the box with such exact propriety that no gossiping matron could find a thread to pull. The box gave them a clear view of the stage and enough visibility to prevent the outing from seeming hidden. Maribel noticed that at once. He had not placed her in shadow. He had not placed her on display. He had chosen a middle ground where dignity could breathe. Across the curved tiers, faces turned in increments. Lady Veilcombe occupied a nearby box in plum satin, her fan already moving though the house was not warm. She studied Maribel's ribbon, then Benedict's profile, and smiled with the patience of a woman saving a knife for later. During the first interval of murmured greetings, she leaned just far enough for her voice to carry. "How generous His Grace has become with his evenings." The insult was small. That was what made it socially usable. Benedict did not turn at once. He allowed the words to settle where everyone could identify them. Then he looked toward Lady Veilcombe. Generosity implies sacrifice, Lady Veilcombe. I invited Lady Maribel because I expected the evening to improve in her company. Lady Veilcombe's fan paused. Then I hope she rewards your confidence. Maribel felt the old instinct to shrink from the exchange before it grew teeth. Benedict looked back to her, not asking permission aloud, but leaving the next choice visibly hers. She could retreat into silence. She could let him handle it. Instead, she inclined her head toward the neighboring box. Confidence is not a debt, Lady Veilcombe. One need not repay it like a loan. The space between boxes went very quiet. Mrs. Rowley sipped her tea with the expression of a woman watching a minor enemy step into mud. Benedict's gaze remained on the stage, but Maribel saw the restrained approval in the line of his cheek. The overture began before Lady Veilcombe could answer. Music rose from the pit and filled the house with something too large for gossip to master. Maribel had forgotten that sound could enter the body without asking permission. The first notes moved beneath her ribs, then opened a chamber she had kept closed for years. Her mother had once taken her to music afternoons in smaller rooms, where Maribel was praised not for beauty, but for listening well. Later Miss Anselm had taught her rhythm at the piano, tapping one finger on the lid and saying, "Count through fear." Music does not stop because the hand trembles. The memory struck so cleanly that Maribel's breath caught. Benedict noticed. He always noticed. "Is it too loud?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "It is too familiar." He accepted the answer without pressing it. Onstage, the soprano began a passage of such controlled grief that even the restless gentleman in the pit seemed chastened. Maribel found herself leaning forward. The melody turned unexpectedly, refusing the obvious resolution, and she spoke before caution could stop her. "There." That phrase should have comforted her, but it does not. It leaves her suspended. Benedict turned his head. "You hear that?" Anyone could hear it. Many people hear sound. Fewer hear refusal. She looked at him then. Refusal. The composer denies the audience relief. It is merciless, but honest. Maribel's fingers closed around her program. Miss Anselm used to say music told the truth more safely than people did. The name entered the box and changed the air. Mrs. Rowley lowered her cup. Benedict's expression did not shift into curiosity too quickly. That restraint made him more dangerous to secrets, not less. She sounds wise. She was dismissed. Wisdom often is. Maribel looked back at the stage, but the music had opened too many doors. I remember her telling me to count. Not at the piano. Somewhere else. I cannot place it. Do you wish to? The question was gentle enough to hurt. She thought of the fragments hidden in the music primer, of blue silk and smoke and a lamp in the wrong place. I do not know. Wanting the truth and fearing it appear to be the same occupation. They are not, Benedict said. But they often sit close together. A footman appeared at the rear of the box as the act ended, carrying a folded note on a salver. Benedict took it and read the seal before opening it. Maribel saw the moment his attention sharpened. Not alarm. Confirmation. He read 2 lines, no more, then folded the note and placed it inside his coat. Mrs. Rowley's eyes narrowed. News? Benedict glanced at Maribel. Yes. He did not hide the existence of it. He did not hand it to the room either. Mr. Harbury has found a trace of Miss Anselm in Bath. It is not certainty yet, but it is stronger than rumour. Maribel heard the music below them as if from another country. She may be alive. Yes. The word struck with terrible softness. Alive meant memory could speak. Alive meant the past had not been buried beyond reach. Alive meant Lord Fairclough had reason to fear a name. Maribel looked down and realized the ivory ribbon had slipped loose from the pearl clasp and fallen from her throat to her wrist. Her first impulse was to lift it back into place. Benedict saw the movement begin and stop. He bent, picked up the ribbon where it had slid against the velvet edge of the chair, and placed it across her open palm. He did not raise it toward her face. He did not ask whether she wished to hide. "You dropped this," he said. Maribel looked at the silk, then at him. "Most people would have helped me put it back. I am not most people." "That is becoming difficult to dispute." The corner of his mouth softened, but his voice remained low. "I won't keep truth from you when it belongs to you. But I won't give it to a theater full of strangers before you've had the chance to breathe." She closed her fingers around the ribbon. "That sounds almost like protection. Only if you choose it." The second act began. Around them, society lifted opera glasses and resumed its graceful hunger. Lady Veilcombe watched from her box, no doubt already shaping the evening into a story she could use. But Maribel no longer belonged entirely to the watching room. Somewhere in Bath, perhaps, a woman who remembered the nursery fire still breathed. Somewhere inside herself, a blue dress moved through smoke. And in her hand lay the ribbon, no longer tightened by command, but held by choice while the music rose again and refused, at last, to resolve too soon. The morning after the opera, London acquired a new delicacy to taste with its tea. No one called it scandal yet, because scandal required evidence and London preferred suspense. Still, by noon, Maribel heard the shape of it in the pauses between servants' footsteps, in Cecily's careful sweetness at breakfast, and in Lord Faircliff's decision to be almost kind. That kindness alarmed her more than a reprimand would have done. "Lady Veilcombe has invited you and your sister to view the exhibition at Somerset House tomorrow afternoon," he said, as though he were granting a harmless pleasure. Maribel looked up from the toast she had not eaten. "Both of us?" "Naturally." Cecily stirred her tea without meeting Maribel's eyes. "Lady Veilcombe says everyone will be there. The Markhams. The Ellingfords. Perhaps even His Grace, if he isn't too occupied with being mysterious." Her attempt at lightness failed. Lord Faircliff folded his newspaper. "The Duke of Alderwick may attend briefly. Lady Veilcombe extended the invitation before last night." Maribel understood then. He had not chosen kindness. He had chosen witnesses. If she appeared at the exhibition under Lady Veilcombe's management, then the opera could be made to seem a curiosity already cooling. If Benedict did not arrive, Maribel would stand alone again. If he did arrive, Lord Faircliff could watch what passed between them in a room crowded enough to restrain him and sharp enough to judge her. "How thoughtful," Maribel said. Her father's eyes narrowed. "You will not be clever?" "No. I shall leave that to Lady Veilcombe." Cecily gave a tiny, startled laugh, then pressed her napkin to her lips when their father looked at her. The exhibition rooms at Somerset House smelled of varnish, damp wool, and expensive restraint. Paintings filled the walls from chair rail to cornice, each gilt frame demanding admiration with the confidence of rank. Ladies drifted through the rooms in pale silks and feathered bonnets, pausing before portraits with expressions that suggested they were weighing not art, but acquaintance. Gentlemen carried catalogues and used them mostly to avoid admitting whom they had been watching. Maribel entered between Cecily and Lady Veilcombe, with Mrs. Rowley prevented from attending by a sudden note from her physician that Maribel suspected had been encouraged by Lord Faircliff's planning. Her father remained near the entrance with two gentlemen, close enough to supervise, far enough to claim indifference. The ivory ribbon was fastened at Maribel's throat by the pearl clasp. It did not cover the full scar. After the opera, she had found she could not bear to pull it higher. Lady Veilcombe saw that immediately. "My dear Lady Maribel," she said, pausing before a portrait of a young duchess painted with impossible skin, "how courageous of you to wear the ribbon so informally." Maribel looked at the portrait. "Is it courage to fasten silk at one's throat?" "In some cases, yes." Lady Veilcombe's voice softened just enough to gather the nearest listeners. "One must admire a woman who does not allow misfortune to make her bitter." Cecily's eyes moved quickly to Maribel. "Lady Veilcombe only means to be kind." "Then I hope she recovers from the effort," Maribel said. A woman behind them coughed into her glove. Lady Veilcombe's fan opened. "You are in spirited humour." "I am in excellent health." "How fortunate." "Your father worries so." "My father worries most when I answer questions myself." The small circle around them shifted. Lady Veilcombe had wanted blushes, perhaps tears. She had not expected accuracy. Cecily touched Maribel's arm with a gesture that looked affectionate from a distance and desperate up close. Don't make everything a contest. I did not begin one. No, Cecily whispered. You never think you do. That hurt more than Lady Valecomb's polished cruelty, because for one moment Cecily sounded less malicious than frightened. Maribel looked at her sister's face and saw strain under the rose-colored bonnet, a tremor in the mouth trained to smile. Before she could answer, Lady Valecombe guided them toward a large seascape where dark waves rose beneath a violet sky. There, she said brightly. Something dramatic enough to suit the mood. Maribel stopped before the painting. A small boat fought the storm near the lower edge, almost lost, yet not overturned. The painter had given the sea all the obvious power, but the eye returned again and again to the boat. Survival had its own authority. It is better than the portrait, Maribel said. Because it is gloomy? Cecily asked. Because it is honest. Lady Valecombe tilted her head. Honesty is not always pleasant in company. Then perhaps company should develop a stronger constitution. A ripple of reaction passed through the nearby guests. Maribel felt herself becoming too visible and refused to retreat from it. She searched, despite herself, toward the doorway. No Benedict. She knew he had been invited. Lady Valecombe had made sure everyone knew. A duke's absence could humiliate as effectively as a duke's rejection. What Maribel did not know was that, 2 streets away, Benedict Vale was standing in his study with Mr. Harbury's urgent note in hand, delayed by the first true lead from Bath. Miss Anselm had been located. Alive. Willing, perhaps, to speak. He ordered his carriage before he had finished reading. At Somerset House, Lady Valecombe moved closer to Maribel with the slow confidence of a woman who had decided the Duke would not come in time. Your ribbon has slipped, she said. It has not. Cecily, help your sister. One must not let a small negligence become a large discomfort for everyone. Cecily's hand tightened on her catalogue. Lady Valecombe, perhaps, really, child, it is only a ribbon. Several people now watched openly. Lord Faircliff's gaze sharpened from across the room, not with concern for Maribel, but with warning. Maribel lifted one hand to the pearl clasp. I can manage it. Cecily moved first, too quickly. Let me. Father's already angry. Her fingers reached the clasp before Maribel could step back. Perhaps Cecily meant only to adjust it. Perhaps her fear made her clumsy. Perhaps a darker impulse moved through her, one taught in parlours and rewarded by silence. The clasp twisted. The ivory ribbon loosened, slid from Maribel's throat, and fell to the polished floor. The scar was fully visible beneath the cold afternoon light. Silence did not descend. It spread. First the young lady nearest the seascape stopped speaking. Then the gentleman beside her lowered his catalogue. Then Lady Valecombe's fan stilled in perfect satisfaction disguised as concern. Maribel felt the air touch her cheek where silk had been. The old instinct rose with terrible force. Bend. Pick it up. Cover the mark. Spare the room. Spare Cecily. Spare father. Spare everyone except yourself. Her fingers trembled at her side. The ribbon lay between her slipper and Cecily's hem, pale and helpless. Cecily stared at it as though it had betrayed them both. Maribel, she whispered. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Lady Valecombe stepped in with a voice shaped like mercy. Poor dear. Sit down before you distress yourself. The word poor struck harder than the fall of the ribbon. Maribel looked at the storm painting. The little boat remained in the waves, small but not ashamed of surviving them. Slowly, she let her hands fall still. She did not pick up the ribbon. She did not turn her face away. I am not distressed, she said. Her voice was low, but the room heard because cruelty had already made it quiet. I believe others are merely disappointed that I have not performed distress for them. Lady Valecombe's smile froze. Cecily's eyes filled, but Maribel could not tend to her sister's fear while her own life was being used as theatre. A movement came from the entrance. The air changed before the crowd did, as if rank itself had entered and forced every whisper to stand straighter. Benedict Vale crossed the room with his hat in one hand and a folded note still visible between his gloved fingers. He did not hurry. That restraint gave his anger shape. Lord Faircliff moved to intercept him, but Benedict's gaze passed through him to Maribel. He stopped beside the fallen ribbon. "Lady Maribel," he said. "Are you hurt?" "Not exposed." "Not embarrassed?" "Hurt." The question nearly undid the courage she had gathered. "No," she said. "Not in the way they intended." Something fierce and quiet entered his eyes. He bent, picked up the ribbon, and held it for one measured moment while the room waited for him to restore order by restoring concealment. Instead, he placed the silk across Maribel's open palm. His glove did not touch her skin. "Then it belongs to you," he said. "Not to their comfort." The words moved through the exhibition room more cleanly than any accusation. Lady Valecomb's colour rose. "Your Grace, it was an accident." Lady Cecily was only assisting her sister. Benedict looked at Cecily. Was she? Cecily opened her mouth. No graceful answer came. Lord Faircliff stepped forward, his face pale with controlled fury. "This is a family matter." Benedict's voice lowered. "You have made her face a public matter often enough." A gasp flickered near the seascape. Lord Faircliff stiffened. Maribel closed her fingers around the ribbon. She should have felt protected. She did. But more than that, she felt seen standing, not rescued collapsing. Benedict turned slightly toward her, and when he spoke again, his words were meant for her alone, though the room strained to hear them. "Miss Anselm remembers the fire differently." The world narrowed. The paintings, the guests, Cecily's tears, Lady Valecomb's frozen fan, all of it receded behind that name. Maribel's pulse struck once, hard. Differently from whom? Benedict's gaze moved, briefly and unmistakably, to Lord Faircliff. "From your father." Lord Faircliff's cane hit the floor. "You will not discuss old household confusion in a public gallery." Maribel looked at him, then at the ribbon in her hand, then at the faces waiting to learn whether she would shrink back into the version of herself they preferred. For years, that voice had been a wall. Now there was a crack in it. She did not raise the ribbon to her throat. "No," she said, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "Perhaps not today. But if the past is only confusion, Father, you should not look so afraid of memory." The room held its breath. Benedict did not speak for her. He stood beside her and allowed the words to remain hers. Behind them, whispers began again, but they had changed. They were no longer certain. An uncertainty, Maribel realized, was the first wound a lie could receive. The ride back to Faircliff House felt less like a return than a sentence being carried out under wheels. Cecily sat opposite Maribel with her hands locked together, her gloves twisted at the fingers. Lord Faircliff did not look at either daughter. He stared through the carriage window at the grey sweep of London streets, but Maribel could see his reflection in the glass, pale with fury and something more revealing. Fear had made him look older. The ivory ribbon lay folded in Maribel's lap. She had not put it back at her throat. She felt the exposed line of the scar with every shift of carriage light, yet the shame that usually followed did not come in its familiar shape. It had been disturbed. Benedict's words had done that. Not to their comfort. Cecily broke first. "I truly didn't mean for it to fall." Lord Faircliff's head turned. "Enough." "But Father, everyone saw, and His Grace," I said. "Enough." Cecily's mouth closed. Maribel watched her sister shrink into the seat, and for the first time since childhood she saw how quickly beauty lost its power when their father did not need it. At Faircliff House, Lord Faircliff stepped down without offering his hand. In the hall, the portraits above the staircase seemed to wait for his verdict. He removed his gloves with exact care and laid them on the tray. "Drawing room," he said. Cecily began to follow. "Not you." The old division fell into place. Cecily protected from consequence. Maribel summoned to bear it. This time, Cecily did not look relieved. She looked ill. Maribel walked into the drawing room with the ribbon still in her hand. The fire had been lit, but the room held no warmth. Lord Faircliff shut the door and stood with his back to it for one measured breath. You will not see the Duke of Alderwick again. I do not recall being asked. You have mistaken public attention for liberty. No, Maribel said. I have mistaken silence for safety. That was my error. His eyes hardened. Do not become theatrical. You embarrassed your sister today. She looked at the ribbon. Cecily embarrassed herself. Lady Veilcombe assisted. You supervised. A flush climbed his cheekbones. You will apologize to Lady Veilcombe. For standing still. For inviting a scene. Maribel lifted her eyes. I stood in a gallery while others made my face their entertainment. If that is a scene, father, perhaps you should question who staged it. His composure cracked just enough to show the threat beneath. He crossed to the writing desk and took up a small stack of papers. One card lay on top, thick and cream-colored, bearing the name Lord Havisham. Maribel recognized it with a coldness that spread through her chest. Lord Havisham was a widower older than her father liked to admit, wealthy, orderly, and known for wanting a household that ran like a clock and a wife who did not interrupt its ticking. Lord Havisham called while you were at the exhibition, Lord Fairclough said. He has renewed an interest I once considered premature. Premature for what? For a sensible settlement. He placed the calling card on the table, then unfolded the paper beneath it. A notice has been drafted. Nothing will be sent to the papers until terms are settled, but the understanding may be announced privately within the week. Maribel looked at the words. An understanding between Lord Havisham and Lady Maribel Davenant. Her name sat there in dark ink, arranged without her hand, as if her future had already been measured and folded for dispatch. You wrote this before speaking to me. I am speaking to you now. No. You are informing me. That is often all daughters require. The sentence was so calm that it chilled her more than shouting. She set the ivory ribbon beside the draft notice. Pale silk next to black ink. 2 instruments of correction. I will not marry Lord Havisham. Lord Fairclough almost smiled. You imagine Alderwick has changed your position. He has not. A duke may defend you in public if it amuses him. He will not live with the consequences of your reputation when he tires of moral display. You do not know him. Neither do you. That struck closer than she wished. Lord Fairclough saw it and pressed. Havisham is not sentimental. He does not require beauty, freshness, or fashionable ease. He values order. In his house, your unfortunate notoriety would settle into usefulness. Usefulness, she repeated. You make marriage sound like storage. For a woman who has attracted gossip, storage can be mercy. Maribel looked at him, truly looked, and understood that he had never imagined her loved. Provided for, managed, hidden, perhaps tolerated. Never loved. The revelation hurt, but it also burned away the last childish hope that his cruelty was a clumsy form of care. I will not go from one locked room to another, she said. The door opened before Lord Fairclough answered. Cecily stood there without permission, her face pale. Father, please. Lord Havisham is awful. He turned toward her with cold astonishment. You forget yourself. Cecily's fingers tightened around the door frame. No, I think I forgot too long. Silence followed. Maribel felt it tremble. Lord Fairclough moved one step towards Cecily, and she recoiled before he came near. He noticed. They all did. Go upstairs, he said. Cecily's courage collapsed, but not completely. I didn't mean for the ribbon to fall, she said to Maribel, her voice breaking. I was afraid Lady Veilcombe would tell father I hadn't helped. Lord Fairclough's face sharpened. Cecily. She fled. Maribel stood very still. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. But a truth had slipped out, small and frightened, and her father had been unable to stop it. Lord Fairclough returned to the desk and folded the draft notice with deliberate care. You will remain at home tomorrow. No calls. No letters received unless I inspect them. If Alderwick writes, the letter comes to me. If Mrs. Rowley calls, you are indisposed. If you force me further, I will send you to Fairclough Park and inform London your nerves require country air. Maribel felt the old house closing around her in advance. Parkland. Distance. Servants loyal to him. The nursery corridor where memory still waited. You cannot bury every question in the country. I can bury enough. The honesty of that nearly stole her breath. Lord Faircliff opened the door. Go. She went because staying would win nothing. In her chamber, Alice waited with anxious eyes and a shawl in her hands. My lady. Maribel shut the door and stood against it for a moment. Then she crossed to the rosewood box and removed the music primer. The fragments of Miss Anselm's letter lay inside, one line about the lamp, one line about the blue dress and Cecily carried from the nursery. Maribel placed them on the desk with shaking hands. Alice, I need a letter delivered. Alice glanced toward the corridor. His lordship said no letters. I know. Then he may dismiss me if I'm found out. Yes. Maribel forced herself not to soften the danger. He may. I will not ask you to risk that unless you choose it. Alice looked at the scar, uncovered now in the privacy of the room. Then she looked at the fragments. Is it for his grace? Yes. But not through the front door. Not through any servant my father commands. Alice drew a breath. My brother runs errands for a bookseller near Bond Street. He knows the mews behind most great houses. For a coin, he can find Alderwick House. Can he be trusted? For a coin, usually. Alice's voice steadied. For the lady who paid for my mother's medicine when the fever took her, better than usually. Maribel had almost forgotten. It had been a small thing. A purse pressed quietly into Alice's hand, years ago, before Lord Faircliff could notice generosity leaving the family accounts. The memory returned now with a kind of ache. Kindness had witnesses too. Maribel sat and wrote quickly, because fear grew stronger when given leisure. She did not begin with your grace. She could not write Benedict. She chose plainness. I no longer trust the story I was given. My father intends to accept Lord Havisham on my behalf and remove me from London if I object. He has forbidden correspondence. I am enclosing the fragments because Miss Anselm's memory may be the only witness left that was not trained by fear. She folded the letter around the fragments, then hesitated. To send them was to let the past leave her control. To keep them was to remain alone with proof no one else could use. She sealed the paper with a plain wafer, no crest, no perfume, nothing her father could recognize from across a room. Alice took it and tucked it inside her apron. Should I say it's urgent? Maribel looked at the ribbon on the desk, still beside Lord Havisham's draft notice. The silk and the paper seemed to speak the same command in different languages. Be hidden. Be settled. Be grateful. She picked up the ribbon and placed it inside the rosewood box, not on her throat. Say it is no longer private. Alice slipped out. Maribel stood alone and listened to the house breathe around her. Somewhere below, Lord Faircliff was likely writing a reply to Havisham. Somewhere across London, Benedict might already be searching for a woman dismissed for telling the truth. Between them moved a letter carried by a servant's brother through back lanes her father would never think to fear. Maribel pressed both palms to the desk until they steadied. She was still trapped in Faircliff House. But the truth was not. The letter reached Alderwick House through the mews shortly after noon, carried by a bookseller's errand boy who looked at the Duke's groom with more suspicion than awe and refused to surrender the paper until he was promised it would go directly into his Grace's hand. Benedict received it in his study while Mr. Harbury waited beside the desk with a folded report from Bath. For one measured second, neither man spoke. The seal was plain. The paper bore no crest. Yet Benedict knew before he unfolded it that Maribel had risked something to send it. He read the first line and felt the room grow colder. I no longer trust the story I was given. By the time he reached Lord Havisham's name, the threat had become clear. By the time he unfolded the fragments of Miss Anselm's old letter, anger had ceased to be heat and become discipline. We leave for Bath within the hour, he said. Mr. Harbury adjusted his spectacles. I have found her lodging, Your Grace. She may not receive a duke willingly. Then she will receive a man who asks permission before entering. The journey west gave Benedict too much time to think of Faircliff House. He imagined Maribel inside it with doors watched, letters opened, and her future drafted in another man's hand. He had thought rank could solve many things. A title could silence an insult. A name could halt a rumor. A carriage could remove a lady from a crowded room. But Maribel's imprisonment was not made of walls alone. It was made of stories. To free her, the story had to be broken without breaking her inside it. Miss Helena Anselm lived near Sydney Gardens in a modest lodging that smelled faintly of lavender, ink, and coal smoke. She was thinner than Benedict expected, her hair threaded with silver, her hands folded tightly until Mr. Harbury spoke Maribel's name. Then the old governess shut her eyes. She found something, didn't she? Benedict remained standing until she nodded toward the chair. She found fragments of a letter. Miss Anselm opened her eyes. Then Lord Faircliff did not destroy all of it. Her voice was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It had carried the same truth for years and grown tired of being disbelieved by an empty room. Mr. Harbury set out paper. Miss Anselm, His Grace asks only what you are willing to state and sign. She looked at Benedict. Does Lady Maribel know you came? She asked for the truth to leave that house. The answer steadied her. She began with the night of the nursery fire at Faircliff Park. A small house party had filled the lower rooms. Cecily had been left in the nursery wing after a quarrel among servants about who had been instructed to attend her. The lamp had stood on a small table by the window, not near the centre rug where Lord Faircliff later insisted Maribel had upset it. Miss Anselm had smelled smoke from the schoolroom corridor. Before she reached the nursery door, Maribel had already gone inside. She wore a blue dress, Miss Anselm said, and her fingers tightened around the edge of her shawl. Not a ball gown. A day dress. The left sleeve was scorched after she came out. I remember because I tried to cut the burned threads away before her father entered. Benedict did not interrupt. Lady Cecily had hidden near the curtain. Children do that when frightened. They make themselves smaller. Lady Maribel heard her coughing. She went in low, beneath the worst of the smoke, and carried the child out. The screen by the window fell as she turned back toward the door. That was what marked her face. Mr. Harbury's pen moved steadily. Benedict's hand had gone still on the head of his cane. Miss Anselm looked toward the window. She would not let anyone take the little one from her until they were in the corridor. She kept saying, "Count, Cecily. Count with me." She had been taught to count through music, you see. It was how she steadied herself. The image entered Benedict so sharply that for a moment he saw not the scar, but the girl before it, blue sleeve scorched, child in arms, terror disciplined into care. And afterward, he asked. Miss Anselm's mouth tightened. Afterward, Lord Faircliff ordered the lamp moved. I saw Thomas Bell carry it from the window table. His lordship said the younger child's future must not be shadowed by negligence in the household. He said Lady Maribel was old enough to bear confusion. When I objected, I was told I had forgotten my place. The next morning I was dismissed without a character. She lifted her chin. I kept copies. A woman without power learns to keep proof. By dusk, Benedict had her signed statement, copies of the old letter, and the name of Thomas Bell, now employed in Berkshire and willing, according to Miss Anselm, to confirm the lamp had been moved. Before Benedict left, Miss Anselm caught his sleeve with a trembling hand and released it at once. Forgive me. There is nothing to forgive. There is. I did not get the letter to her. Benedict's voice softened. You kept enough truth alive for her to find it. Tears brightened the old woman's eyes, but she did not let them fall. Then do not hide her with it, Your Grace. Men often call concealment protection when a woman's pain makes them uncomfortable. The warning followed him all the way back to London. It sat beside him in the dark carriage with the signed pages and the knowledge that could ruin Lord Faircliff if read before the right witnesses. It also could wound Maribel if thrown into society before she chose how to stand beneath it. By the time Benedict reached London the next morning, Lady Veilcomb's assembly had become unavoidable. An invitation waited at Alderwick House, along with a note from Mrs. Rowley saying Lord Faircliff had allowed Maribel one call under her supervision after much resistance. Benedict went at once to the widow's townhouse. Maribel arrived in a grey morning gown, the ivory ribbon at her throat, not her cheek. She looked composed in the way a locked door looked composed. Mrs. Rowley sat near the window with her knitting untouched and her eyes unmercifully alert. Benedict bowed, then waited until Maribel sat before he spoke. "I found Miss Anselm." Maribel's hands closed around each other in her lap. "Is she well?" The question undid him more than any demand for evidence could have done. "She is alive. She remembers." Maribel looked down. "Tell me." He did. Not everything at once, not with the blunt force of a report, but enough. The blue dress. The lamp by the window. Cecily near the curtain. "Count with me." At that, Maribel's breath broke. She covered her mouth for one moment, then lowered her hand as if refusing to hide even that. "I heard counting," she whispered. "I thought I invented it." "You did not." Her eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. "And my father?" "Moved the lamp." Dismissed Miss Anselm. Blamed confusion because it served him. The words should have satisfied something. Instead, they left a hollow in the room. Maribel stared toward the window, where pale light lay across the carpet. "I was not mad. No, I was not cruel. No, I saved her." Benedict's throat tightened. "Yes." Mrs. Rowley looked away, giving the dignity of privacy while staying close enough to protect propriety. Maribel pressed both hands flat against her skirts until they stopped shaking. "What happens now?" This was where Benedict failed her. He knew it even as he spoke, but fear disguised itself too well as strategy. "Miss Anselm's statement is strong, but I want Thomas Bell's confirmation before it is read publicly. Lady Veilcomb's assembly is tomorrow evening. Your father and Lady Veilcombe will expect you to attend. They may provoke you. They may use Havisham. They may call your memory unstable. I think you should stay away until the evidence is beyond challenge." Maribel became very still. "Stay away. For now. Until men decide the truth is safe enough for me to stand near it. That isn't what I mean. It's what my father means when he tells me to rest. It's what he means when he says I am unwell. It's what he means when he says country air will help my nerves." Benedict felt every sentence strike where it should. "I am trying to protect you. By placing me back in the shadow." Her voice did not rise. That made it worse. "You brought me the truth, and then you ask me to hide while you arrange how it may be used. I ask you to avoid a trap. No. You ask me to let you enter it in my place." Mrs. Rowley's needles remained motionless in her lap. Benedict looked at Maribel and saw what he had done. He had stood between her and cruelty so often that he had nearly stood between her and her own voice. "You are right," he said. Maribel blinked, as if she had expected argument and did not know what to do with surrender. "Am I?" "Yes. I mistook control for care. That is a common mistake among men who are certain they are kinder than my father." He accepted the blow. "Then correct me." Her eye searched his face, testing the offer for condescension. "I will go to the assembly. Then I will be there. Beside me. Not ahead of me. Beside you. If evidence is read, I decide when. Yes. If a question must be asked first, I ask it. Yes." The room held the shape of a new agreement, fragile but real. Maribel drew one careful breath. "I am afraid." "I know." "No," she said quietly. "You know danger. You do not know what it is to walk into a room wearing the face your own father taught you to despise." Benedict bowed his head, not in defeat, but in respect. "Then teach me how to stand there with you." For the first time since entering, Maribel looked less locked than wounded. "Do not rescue me from the truth." "I won't. Don't ask me to cover what he did. Never again." When she left with Mrs. Rowley, Benedict remained in the drawing room long after the carriage had gone. A single ivory thread had caught on the chair where she had Saturday. He did not touch it. The ribbon belonged to Maribel. So did the truth. And the next time a room demanded either from her, he would not answer in her place. By the evening of Lady Valecomb's assembly, Maribel understood that courage did not arrive like a trumpet. It arrived like a woman fastening her own gown with cold fingers and refusing to ask whether the room would be kind. Alice stood behind her in the chamber at Mrs. Rowley's townhouse, where Maribel had been permitted to dress after her father's grudging agreement that the widow's supervision made refusal awkward. The grey silk gown was simple, with a clean line at the bodice and no excessive trimming to invite comment. The ivory ribbon was not at Maribel's throat. It was woven through the dark coils of her hair, visible as ornament, useless as concealment. Alice had arranged it once, then stepped back and looked at the scar fully revealed in the lamplight. "My lady," she said softly, "you look like yourself." Maribel swallowed against the sudden ache in her throat. "That is what worries everyone." Mrs. Rowley entered without knocking, because at her age she considered ceremony a courtesy for people with something to hide. She paused, inspected Maribel from face to hem, and gave one short nod. "Good. You look neither apologetic nor deranged, which will disappoint half the guests." Maribel almost smiled. "Do you think they will all stare?" "Of course. People stare at anything they have been taught not to understand." The older woman came closer and adjusted one pearl at Maribel's ear. "The question is not whether they stare. The question is whether you let their staring become instruction." Maribel looked at herself in the mirror. The scar stood where it had always stood, a pale line through the story others had written over her. Behind it lived smoke, blue silk, a child's cough, Miss Anselm's steady hand, Benedict's quiet promise, and a truth still waiting to be spoken aloud. "No," she said. "Not tonight." Lady Valecomb's house shone as if innocence could be purchased in candles. The drawing-rooms were arranged in a bright sequence, each doorway opening into another scene of mirrors, gilt chairs, white flowers, and watching faces. It was not a ball. That made it more dangerous. At a ball, music gave people somewhere to look. In a drawing-room assembly, attention had no occupation except judgment. A footman announced Mrs. Rowley and Lady Maribel Davenant. Conversation thinned at once. It did not stop. Society rarely gave its cruelty the honesty of silence at the beginning. Instead, words lost their endings. Fans hesitated. Two ladies near the mantel looked at Maribel's uncovered cheek, then at the ribbon in her hair, and seemed unsettled by the fact that it had not been placed where shame expected it. Lady Valecombe approached in plum silk, gracious enough to make every insult seem accidental. "Lady Maribel," she said, extending both hands without quite touching. "How brave of you to come." "How expected of you to say so," Maribel replied. Mrs. Rowley made a sound that might have been a cough and might have been satisfaction. Lady Valecombe's smile tightened. "I only mean that after recent confusion, your friends wish to see you safe among people who care for your family." "How crowded this room must feel for them," Maribel said. Lady Valecombe's eyes flickered. Around them, listeners sharpened. "Your father has suffered a great deal of anxiety," the hostess continued, lowering her voice only enough to make others lean in. "A parent's burden is heavy when a daughter becomes the subject of public misunderstanding. Lord Havisham, too, has shown admirable generosity in wishing matters settled quietly." There it was. The trap had been laid not with accusation, but with concern. If Maribel objected, she would appear ungrateful. If she remained silent, the room would accept that her future had already been arranged by kinder minds than hers. "Lord Havisham's generosity is wasted," Maribel said. "I have not asked for it, and I will not marry him." The words moved through the room like a glass dropped on marble. Lady Valecombe's fan paused. "My dear, no one is asking you to decide anything tonight. That has been the difficulty. Too many people have decided things for me when I was not in the room." Before Lady Valecombe could answer, Lord Fairclough entered with Cecily at his side. He looked severe, composed, and faintly triumphant, as if he expected to find his daughter already cornered by sympathy. Cecily wore pale blue, not rose, and her face was colourless beneath the fashionable arrangement of her hair. Her gaze went at once to the ribbon woven into Maribel's hair. Then it dropped to the floor. Lord Fairclough crossed the room with a father's authority sharpened into public performance. "Maribel," he said. "You are unwell." The words were familiar enough to become a door closing. This time Maribel did not stand behind it. No, father. I am present. Several heads turned fully. Lord Faircliff's mouth tightened. This is neither the time nor the place for defiance. Then perhaps it is time for truth, since defiance is what you call it when I do not disappear. Cecily's breath caught. Lady Veilcombe moved quickly, smiling as though soothing a quarrel between children. Let us not distress Lady Maribel. Shock can leave memory unreliable, can it not? We all wish only to spare her the pain of revisiting confusion. Mrs. Rowley's voice cut in, dry as winter. You have invited half Mayfair to witness your delicacy, Lady Veilcombe. How considerate. Lady Veilcombe coloured, but recovered. I invited friends of the family. Then the family appears to have many enemies disguised as guests. A murmur rippled. Then the room changed. Maribel felt it before she saw him. Benedict Vale entered with the calm of a man who brought no spectacle because he had no need to borrow power from one. He bowed first to Lady Veilcombe, then to Mrs. Rowley, then to Maribel. His eyes asked the question before his voice did. Lady Maribel, he said quietly, do you wish me near? The simplicity of it nearly undid her. Not shall I speak. Not shall I remove you. Near. She looked at the watching room, at her father's pale anger, at Cecily's trembling mouth, at Lady Veilcombe's poised concern. Then she looked back at Benedict. Yes, she said. Beside me. He moved to her side, close enough for allegiance to be understood, not close enough to compromise her. Mr. Harbury is in the anteroom, he said, his voice low for her alone. He has the papers. They will not enter this room unless you ask for them. Maribel drew a careful breath. Thank you. Do you want them now? She looked at her father. He looked back with the command that had governed every corridor of her life. Not yet. Benedict inclined his head. Then not yet. Lady Veilcombe had watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. She lifted her voice just enough to reclaim the audience. Your Grace, I hope you have not been troubled by old household tales. Families often simplify painful events for the protection of delicate minds. Benedict's expression did not change. Delicate minds are often blamed by indelicate consciences. The room inhaled. Lord Faircliff stepped forward. You presume much, Alderwick. The use of the ducal title without courtesy was a mistake, and the room knew it. Benedict turned his head slowly. I have presumed very little. That is why I am still listening. Lady Veilcombe intervened before the hierarchy could become the evening's first disaster. Surely we can all agree that the poor dear's memory has been strained. A childhood fire, a frightened sister, a lamp overturned in panic. No one blames Lady Maribel for clinging to a version less painful to her pride. Cecily whispered, please don't. No one knew whom she meant. Maribel knew only that the word lamp had struck her like a bell. The small table by the window. The curtain. The blue sleeve. Count with me. Count with me. Her hands felt cold, but her voice, when it came, was steady. Lady Veilcombe. The hostess turned with a look of polished pity. Yes, my dear. You speak as if my mind failed after the fire. I speak as one who wishes to protect you from distress. Then answer one question. Lord Faircliff's face changed. Not much. Enough. Maribel saw fear pass through his eyes before authority covered it. Lady Veilcombe's fan stilled. What question could possibly help you now? Maribel turned toward her father because this had never truly been Lady Veilcombe's room. It had been his lie wearing her candles. If I caused the fire, why was Miss Anselm dismissed for writing that I saved Cecily? The silence that followed was not polite. It was absolute. Cecily covered her mouth. Lord Faircliff seemed to harden from the inside. Lady Veilcombe looked quickly from one face to another, no longer certain where safety stood. Benedict did not move ahead of Maribel. He did not answer for her. He only stood beside her as promised, letting the question remain in the room until every person present understood that it had not been asked for drama. It had been waiting for years. Then, from the anteroom beyond the far doorway, a footman appeared and bowed. Maribel heard Benedict's quiet voice near her shoulder. Only if you wish it. Her heartbeat filled her ears. She thought of the blue dress. She thought of Miss Anselm in Bath. She thought of the ribbon in her hair, no longer hiding anything. "Bring Mr. Harbury in," she said. The footman bowed again and withdrew. Lady Valecomb's assembly, arranged to make Maribel look fragile, had become the first room in her life where the truth was formally invited to enter. Mr. Harbury entered as if the room had not been arranged to frighten women into silence. He came through the far doorway with a leather case beneath one arm, soberly dressed, neither hurried nor theatrical, and bowed first to Lady Valecombe because the house was hers, then to Benedict because rank required it, then to Maribel because the papers he carried concerned her life. That last bow unsettled her more than the case. Men had bowed over her hand, past her shoulder, toward her father, and before her family name. Few had bowed to the truth of her person. The footman withdrew. The door remained open behind him, which made the moment feel less like a private ambush and more like a public reckoning invited under the rules of the room. Lady Valecombe recovered first. "Your Grace," she said with an airy laugh that failed to lift, "you do keep unusual company at assemblies." Benedict did not look away from Maribel. Mr. Harbury came only because Lady Maribel requested the papers. Lord Fairclough gave a short, hard sound. "My daughter requested nothing. She has been guided into this embarrassment." Maribel felt the old reflex rise. Deny trouble. Lower eyes. Let father explain. Instead, she kept her gaze level. "I requested him." The words were simple. The room heard them. Lord Fairclough turned toward her as though she had spoken in a language he had forbidden. "You do not understand what you are doing." "No," Maribel said. "I am beginning to understand exactly what was done to me." A murmur stirred and died. Mr. Harbury waited with professional patience. He did not open the case. Benedict still did not move. Maribel understood the significance of both restraints. The evidence would not be flung before the room to prove her while silencing her. It would enter only at her command. Mrs. Rowley came to stand a little closer, the lace at her cap trembling faintly with each sharp breath. "My dear," she said, "choose the part you are ready to hear in public." Maribel looked at Cecily. Her sister stood near their father, pale in blue silk, one hand pressed to her waist as if holding herself together. Lady Valecombe watched her with irritation now, not compassion. A frightened ally was of little use to a hostess arranging cruelty. "The letter," Maribel said. "The part Miss Anselm wrote for me to know." Mr. Harbury opened the brass clasp. The click sounded too loud. He drew out a folded page and a second sheet bearing a signature. "This is a witness statement given in Bath by Miss Helena Anselm, formerly governess at Fairclough Park. I have verified her employment in the Fairclough household during the year of the nursery fire." Lord Fairclough stepped forward. "A dismissed governess does not become credible because a duke finds her convenient." "No," Mr. Harbury said calmly. "She becomes credible when her statement agrees with surviving correspondence and the recollection of another former servant." The room shifted. Lord Fairclough's face tightened. Lady Valecombe's fan froze halfway open. Maribel felt Benedict beside her, still as a drawn line. Mr. Harbury unfolded the page. "Miss Anselm states, on the evening of the fire in the nursery wing, Lady Maribel Davenant did not overturn the lamp. The lamp stood on the small table near the window, where it had been placed earlier that afternoon. I smelled smoke from the schoolroom corridor and found Lady Maribel already entering the nursery. Lady Cecily had hidden near the curtain. Lady Maribel carried her out." Cecily's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Harbury continued, his voice even, merciless because it was exact. "Miss Anselm further states, Lady Maribel wore a blue day dress. The left sleeve was scorched." She repeated the words, "Count with me," to calm Lady Cecily as she brought the child into the corridor. Her injury occurred when the screen by the window fell as she turned toward the door. Maribel closed her eyes for one breath. "Count with me." The words did not arrive as thunder. They arrived as a rhythm, a broken measure recovered after years of being called madness. She had not invented the counting. She had not invented the child in her arms. She had not invented the blue sleeve. When she opened her eyes, the room seemed altered, not kinder, but less certain of its right to judge. Lord Faircliff recovered with the desperation of a man who had always trusted authority to outlive proof. Memory can be persuaded. Servants speak of what they think will be rewarded. Benedict's voice entered quietly. Miss Anselm was dismissed without a character for trying to send that account years ago. What reward did she receive? Lord Faircliff's nostrils flared. She forgot her place. The words left him before caution could dress them. They hung in the drawing-room, uglier than any accusation Maribel could have made. Mrs. Rowley's face went white with controlled rage. Her place was nearer truth than yours, Faircliff. Lady Veilcombe tried to turn the air. Surely we need not descend into old servants' grievances. A family may remember pain differently without anyone intending harm. Pain is not the same as a lie, Maribel said. Her voice surprised her. It was low, but it carried. And being told to carry a lie does not make it memory. Lord Faircliff looked at her with a coldness that had once been enough to stop her heart. You will regret turning your family into an exhibition. I was made an exhibition at Somerset House, she answered. Tonight I am asking why. He had no answer. Not one that could survive witnesses. Mr. Harbury lifted the second sheet. There is another matter. Miss Anselm states that she attempted to write to a relation of the late Lady Davenant. That letter was taken from her desk by Lord Faircliff. A copy was kept. The surviving fragment in Lady Maribel's possession matches Miss Anselm's copy. Lady Veilcombe's gaze darted to Lord Faircliff, then away. The movement was small, but society lived by small movements. It told the room that she had begun separating herself from the man she had helped. Benedict spoke then, and this time he looked directly at Lord Faircliff. You may dislike what is being read. You may not dismiss Lady Maribel's right to hear it. She is my daughter. She is not your property. The sentence fell with such clean force that the room seemed to draw back from it. Maribel felt it enter her not as rescue, but as confirmation. The truth did not belong to Benedict either. He had simply named what her father had refused to recognize. Lord Faircliff's mouth tightened. You speak in grand terms over matters you do not understand. A father must preserve a family. By sacrificing one daughter's mind to protect another daughter's prospects? Benedict asked. Cecily made a small sound. Not protest. Not denial. A wounded sound, as if the words had found a place she had been pressing against for years. Maribel turned to her. The room blurred at the edges. Not from fear now, but from the terrible nearness of the last door. Cecily had been 6. Cecily had been frightened. Cecily had benefited. All three could be true, and truth had never promised to be simple. Lady Veilcombe reached towards Cecily, perhaps to quiet her, perhaps to guide her back into the safer shape of decorative distress. Cecily stepped away. Don't, she whispered. Lord Faircliff's head snapped toward her. Cecily. The name was command. Cecily trembled under it. Maribel remembered the carriage, her sister saying she had not meant for the ribbon to fall. She remembered the dressing room, Cecily speaking of being calculated over rather than loved. She remembered a small child hidden near a curtain, if memory could be trusted now. Cecily, Maribel said. Her sister looked at her with wide, wet eyes. You do not have to answer for him. But you do have to answer for yourself. Lord Faircliff's voice sharpened. She was a child. Then let the woman tell us what the child remembers, Mrs. Rowley said. A countess near the mantel murmured something to her husband. A gentleman behind Lady Veilcombe lowered his gaze. The room had stopped feeding on spectacle. It was listening now, not nobly, not gently, but because the story had become too dangerous to misunderstand. Mr. Harbury remained silent with the pages in hand. Benedict stood beside Maribel and did not speak. That restraint gave her the final courage she needed. Maribel faced her sister fully. The ivory ribbon in her hair felt suddenly weightless, as if its old purpose had loosened strand by strand. Cecily, she asked, her voice steady though her hands were cold, were you the child I carried from the fire? Cecily did not answer. Her mouth opened, but no sound came, and in that wordless space the whole room seemed to discover how long a silence could be when truth stood at one end of it and a father's command at the other. Lord Faircliff turned toward his younger daughter with the cold authority that had governed nurseries, breakfast tables, letters, invitations, and fear. "You will not dignify this absurdity." Cecily flinched as if the words had crossed the room and touched her. Maribel did not move. She kept her gaze on her sister, not pleading, not accusing, only asking for the one honest thing that could no longer be hidden behind beauty, youth, or obedience. "Cecily," she said again, "were you the child I carried from the fire?" Cecily looked at Lord Faircliff. His face was command itself. Then she looked at Maribel's uncovered scar, at the ivory ribbon woven through her hair like a pale remnant of an old sentence, and something in her expression broke. "Yes," she whispered. The room changed. It did not erupt. It recoiled. Lady Valecomb's fan lowered inch by inch. Mrs. Rowley shut her eyes for a single breath. Benedict remained beside Maribel, but Maribel felt the stillness of him sharpen. Lord Faircliff spoke over the silence. "She was 6. Frightened children remember what they are told to remember." Cecily shook her head. No, the word was small, but it did not obey him. "I remember the blue dress." Maribel's breath stopped. Cecily pressed both hands together, as if she could hold herself upright by force. "I remember smoke near the curtain. I remember hiding because I thought if I was small enough, the fire wouldn't find me. I remember Maribel coughing and telling me to count. I remember her sleeve. It smelled burned. She wouldn't let go of me in the corridor even when everyone was shouting." The details struck one after another, not like blows, but like keys turning in doors Maribel had been told did not exist. Miss Anselm's statement. Her own broken memory. Cecily's fear. All of them met in the center of the room and became one truth. Mr. Harbury lifted another page. There is also the statement of Thomas Bell, formerly underfootman at Faircliff Park. He confirms that after the fire Lord Faircliff ordered the lamp moved from the window table to the center of the nursery rug before the physician and guests were permitted into the room. A heavier murmur passed through the assembly. Lady Valecombe stepped slightly away from Lord Faircliff, not far enough to be obvious, but far enough for survival. Lord Faircliff's face tightened with contempt. "Servants. Governesses. Frightened girls. This is the foundation on which you intend to ruin a family." "No," Maribel said. Her voice was quiet enough that the room leaned toward it. "You ruined it when you decided one daughter's truth was less useful than another daughter's prospects." His eyes flashed. "You were old enough to bear misunderstanding." The sentence escaped him whole. It stood naked in the candlelight. Even those who had come hoping for gossip seemed to understand that something indecent had just been confessed. Maribel felt the old wound open, but this time it did not swallow her. It remained outside her, ugly and visible, belonging to him. "No child is old enough to bear a lie for a parent," she said. "No daughter is old enough to become her father's hiding place." The silence afterward was judgment. It moved from face to face until Lord Faircliff, who had always trusted rank and certainty to protect him, found neither. The Marquis of Illingford, standing near the far doorway, inclined his head with arctic politeness. "Faircliff, my wife and I will not attend your dinner next week." A countess near the mantel closed her fan. "Nor shall we receive Lady Valecombe's invitations until this matter has settled into something resembling decency." Lady Valecombe turned scarlet. "I was given a family account. I acted from concern." Mrs. Rowley looked at her. "You repeated cruelty with confidence and called it concern. That is not innocence. It is practice." Before Lady Valecombe could answer, a gentleman near the entrance cleared his throat. He was Lord Havisham's cousin, a thin man who had been hovering all evening near the punch table with the nervous importance of a messenger hoping not to become involved. "Lord Havisham asked me to convey, should circumstances become unsuitable, that he will not proceed with any understanding." A small, bitter smile touched Mrs. Rowley's mouth. How swift generosity becomes caution. Maribel looked at the man, then at the folded future her father had tried to force upon her. It had collapsed in public, not because Havisham had grown honorable, but because truth had made her less convenient. That was justice of a kind, though not the kind poets praised. Benedict stepped forward then, only enough for the room to know he spoke not as a spectator, but as a man placing his name where his conscience had already stood. Let there be no further misunderstanding. My regard for Lady Maribel Davenant was never charity. I did not ask her to dance because I pitied a scar. I asked because I saw dignity where others had been taught to see damage. Since then I have seen courage, intelligence, mercy under pressure, and a strength that this room has no right to measure. Maribel's throat tightened. He did not look at her as an object rescued for applause. He looked at the room because the room had helped harm her. If anyone wishes to speak again of her scar, let them do so knowing I consider it the mark of a woman who saved a life while others protected a lie. Cecily sobbed once, quietly. Maribel turned to her. I am grateful you answered. Cecily's tears fell freely now, without grace. I'm sorry. I should have said it sooner. I knew pieces. I knew enough to be afraid. Yes, Maribel said. The answer was not cruel. It was honest. You should have. Cecily bowed her head, and Maribel let the silence between them remain unfinished. Forgiveness could not be performed for an audience simply because confession had arrived late. Lord Faircliff reached for his last weapon. If you leave this house of lies with him, you will not return to mine. Maribel looked at the man who had used home as a lock and called it protection. For years, that threat would have emptied her. Tonight it sounded almost like a door opening. Then Mrs. Rowley will supervise the removal of my belongings tomorrow. Lord Faircliff stared as if he had expected pleading and received accounting. Mrs. Rowley stepped forward. She will stay with me. Benedict looked at Maribel, not at Mrs. Rowley, asking without words whether that was her choice. Maribel nodded. Only then did he accept it. Lady Veilcombe moved as if to close the evening, but Maribel lifted both hands to her hair. The room watched. Slowly, she untwined the ivory ribbon and drew it free. Dark curls loosened around her face. The scar remained fully visible in the candlelight. She held the ribbon before her, the silk that had hidden her, corrected her, and made her easier for others to endure. For years, this was used to make me less troubling to look at, she said. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. Tonight I will not use it that way. Look if you must. Whisper if you choose. But understand this. I am not the shame in this story. No one spoke. Maribel folded the ribbon once and closed it in her hand. She walked toward the doors. Benedict did not offer his arm until they reached the threshold, and even then he paused. May I? He asked softly. The courtesy nearly undid her. Yes, she said. Now. She placed her hand on his arm, and together they left the drawing room at a measured pace, not fleeing, not triumphing, simply refusing to remain where a lie had died. Outside, the night air touched Maribel's scar with a coolness that felt almost clean. Mrs. Rowley went ahead to call the carriage. Benedict stood beside Maribel on the step, leaving enough space for her breath to be her own. Where would you feel safe enough to breathe? He asked. Maribel looked back once at the bright windows where silhouettes already shifted like guilty thoughts behind glass. Then she looked at the street, the waiting carriage, and the ribbon in her hand. Not there, she said. Benedict's answer was quiet. Then not there. London did not apologize. It rearranged itself. Within 2 days of Lady Veilcombe's assembly, the same mouths that had repeated Lord Faircliff's version began saying they had always wondered whether the matter had been more complicated. Invitations to Faircliff House were delayed, then misplaced, then quietly withdrawn. Lady Veilcombe's rooms remained bright, but fewer carriages stopped before them. Lord Havisham sent a note through his cousin expressing relief that no formal understanding had been announced, which Mrs. Rowley read aloud at breakfast with such dry disgust that Maribel laughed for the first time in days. The sound surprised her. It had no bitterness in it. The following morning, Mrs. Rowley supervised the removal of Maribel's belongings from Faircliff House with the severity of a general reclaiming occupied territory. Lord Faircliff did not come down. Whether from pride, shame, or calculation, Maribel did not know. She stood in the hall where he had once ordered her to the drawing room, and watched Alice carry out the rosewood box, the music primer, her mother's ribbon spool, and 2 modest trunks of gowns chosen over the years to make her respectable rather than visible. Cecily appeared at the top of the stairs in a plain morning dress, pale and hollow-eyed. For a moment, neither sister spoke. Then Cecily descended 3 steps and held out a small folded letter. "You don't have to read it now," she said. "I know I don't deserve that." Maribel took the letter. The paper trembled between them, though she could not tell whose hand caused it. "No," she said. "You do not." Cecily flinched, but did not retreat. That was new. "I should have spoken sooner." "Yes. I was afraid of him." Maribel looked toward the closed library door, behind which Lord Fairclough had hidden himself from the daughter he could no longer command. "So was I." Cecily's eyes filled. "Does that make it less unforgivable?" Maribel folded the letter into her glove. "It makes it human. That is not the same as making it finished." Cecily bowed her head. It was not a reconciliation. It was better than a performance of one. Mrs. Rowley gave the footman a final instruction, then led Maribel out beneath the open sky. The scar on Maribel's cheek felt the morning air without ribbon, veil, or apology. No one stopped her. That simple fact felt almost impossible. 3 weeks later, Benedict invited Maribel to Larkmere Hall in Hampshire, with Mrs. Rowley as chaperone and Mr. Harberry's documents safely copied, sealed, and placed beyond Lord Fairclough's reach. The journey took them through green country washed clean by late spring rain. Maribel had expected grandeur from a ducal estate. She found instead a house of honey-coloured stone set above a long lake, dignified without vanity, its windows catching the pale sky as if the building had been designed to hold quiet rather than impress strangers. The Dowager Duchess of Alderwick received her in the morning room. She was tall, silver-haired, and so keen-eyed that Maribel felt seen before a word had been spoken. The older woman looked once at the scar, not with hunger, not with avoidance, then met Maribel's gaze. "My son has always had admirable judgment in horses and intolerable judgment in denying himself happiness," she said. "I am pleased to see he may be improving." Benedict closed his eyes briefly. "Mother!" Maribel laughed softly. The Dowager Duchess seemed satisfied. "Good. There is still laughter in you. That matters more than composure." Larkmere did not ask Maribel to explain herself. That was its first kindness. The servants did not stare twice. Mrs. Rowley declared her bedchamber acceptable, though the lavender soap lacked conviction. Benedict showed Maribel the music room late in the afternoon, stopping at the threshold rather than guiding her inside. The piano stood near tall windows, polished and waiting, with the lake silver beyond the glass. "No one here will ask you to play," he said. "Not even me." Maribel looked at the keys. "Then why bring me?" "Because you might wish to know the room exists." She entered slowly. For years, music had belonged to a closed part of herself, a place sealed by smoke, accusation, and her father's insistence that childhood occupations were best forgotten. She touched one key. The note rose, small and clear, then faded without punishment. Her throat tightened. "Miss Anselm told me to count through fear." "I know. I used to think courage was the absence of trembling." Benedict stood by the door, leaving her space. "And now?" "Now I think it may be trembling and counting anyway." The next morning, they walked beside the lake with Mrs. Rowley positioned on a bench within sight and the Dowager Duchess inspecting roses nearby with enough intensity to keep propriety armed. Benedict had been quiet since breakfast, which meant he had decided something and feared doing it poorly. Maribel waited. She had learned the value of allowing honest men the difficulty of honest words. They stopped beneath an old beech tree where the grass sloped down to the water. Benedict removed his hat, then did nothing for several seconds. "I once asked you to stay away from a room because I feared what it would do to you," he said. "I called it protection. It was control with better manners." Maribel turned toward him. The lake moved behind him in long bands of grey and light. "You corrected yourself. Because you trusted me enough to tell me I was wrong." "I was not feeling particularly trusting at the time." "No," he said. "You were feeling just." The small answer undid her more than a compliment would have done. Benedict drew a slow breath. Maribel, I love you. Not because you suffered. Not because your pain gave me a noble task. I love your mind, your truthfulness when others find it inconvenient, your mercy when it costs you, and the way you stand in a room until the room becomes ashamed of its own cowardice. Her eyes burned. He did not reach for her hand. He did not take the moment before she offered it. I want you as my wife, he said. But not as gratitude. Not as rescue. Not as the neat conclusion London expects after it has been corrected. If you marry me, I want it to be because you choose a life beside me when the choice is finally yours. Maribel looked toward Mrs. Rowley, who was pretending to examine the lake and failing grandly. The Dowager Duchess had paused over the roses with suspicious stillness. Maribel almost laughed again. Then she looked back at Benedict. I am afraid I will bring Faircliff House with me, she said. The locked doors. The waiting for permission. The habit of making myself easier to keep. Then we will leave doors open, he said. And when I forget, you will remind me. I might do so sharply. I depend upon it. She smiled then, and his face changed with such restrained wonder that the last of her doubt loosened. Yes, she said. He went very still. Yes? Yes, Benedict. I'll marry you. Only then did he take out the ring, a sapphire held between two small diamonds, deep water caught between points of light. He placed it on her finger with hand steady enough for a duke and unsteady enough for a man in love. Mrs. Rowley cleared her throat from the bench. At last. I was beginning to fear the roses would hear before I did. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the chapel near Larkmere Hall. It was not crowded with London's curiosity. It was witnessed by those who had earned the right to see joy. Miss Anselm came from Bath and wept without apology when Maribel embraced her. Cecily attended in quiet blue and gave Maribel a small bouquet tied with plain white thread. Maribel accepted it. Not as pardon entire, but as a beginning no longer built on lies. Lord Faircliff did not come. His absence occupied very little space. Months later, as Duchess of Alderwick, Maribel hosted a small gathering at Larkmere Hall. She wore ivory silk with no ribbon at her throat and no veil arranged to flatter one side of her face. When an elderly countess praised her composure, Maribel answered, I hope to be known for less obedient virtues. Benedict heard and looked at her as he had in that first ballroom, as if the crowded world had fallen away and left only the woman he had chosen to see clearly. That night, after the guests retired, Maribel placed Miss Anselm's letters, Thomas Bell's statement, and Cecily's first honest apology inside the rosewood box. She tied the ivory ribbon around them in a simple knot. Not tight. Not binding. A marker of what had been survived and no longer needed to be worn. Then she went to the window where moonlight touched the lake. Benedict came to stand beside her, leaving space until she reached for his hand. Her scar was uncovered in the silver light. The ribbon rested behind her, wrapped around the truth. Maribel did not wonder whether anyone looking at her saw damage first. She knew what she was. A woman who had walked out of shame carrying her own name, and had found a home where nothing true had to be hidden.